Good morning, afternoon, and evening to those joining us from around the world. Welcome to the first ever Entrepreneurship Exchange. My name is Alex Chris, and I'm the head of Intuit QuickBooks Small Business and Self-Employed Group. At QuickBooks, we are obsessed with helping our customers solve their most important financial challenges. This past year, I've traveled virtually to Intuit offices around the world and spoken with many global small business owners. Small businesses and the self-employed are the foundation of the global economy and account for half of the global GDP. Worldwide, there are 800 million small business and self-employed, and those businesses make up 98% of all businesses and employ 60% of the global workforce. Pre-COVID, more than half of these self-starters failed in the first 5 years, and most are still struggling with the ongoing pandemic. When the pandemic hit, governments had to move quickly to deliver much-needed relief to small businesses. In the U.S., Intuit rallied behind our customers and delivered over $1.4 billion in Paycheck Protection Program funds to our customers. But businesses around the world still need our support. We're seeing entrepreneurs expect more control over their lives, including how they manage and run their businesses. Every person joining today's conference is deeply invested in small business outcomes, supporting entrepreneurs, providing resources and platforms to drive growth, and advocating for the policies small and medium enterprises around the world need to thrive. Yet until now, there has not been a forum for small business leaders, entrepreneurs, experts, and policymakers from around the globe to come together and address challenges and discover solutions that will ensure the future of small businesses. A critical part of small business success is shaped by the policies that impact small businesses and the resources available to help them grow. That's why we are thrilled to help bring all of these pieces together by partnering with the Small Business Roundtable to exchange ideas and surface trends that will help all of us to better understand how to best support small business growth. Thank you again for your commitment to small businesses and entrepreneurs around the world. And thank you to our panelists, discussion leaders, and our sponsors, Facebook and Visa, for helping bring this forum to life. I know the discussions that take place today will have a lasting impact on our customers and all the small businesses around the world. With that, I'll hand it off.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the thousands of stakeholders from around the globe for joining us today for this amazing inaugural summit. Obviously, we can't wait for the day where we can all convene in person, but whether you're joining us from the office or from the couch, we're so excited to have your participation. Today's event is one of the first convenings of policymakers, small business owners and leaders, and entrepreneurial advocates. The role of small business in the global economy cannot be overstated. Beyond representing the vast majority of all businesses, small businesses provide the majority of the world's jobs and more than half of global GDP in developed economies. In other words, small is big when we think about all of the global economy. And that is why we're here today, to have a broad dialogue about how all of us can support the world's job creators, small businesses. Our hope is that today's program provides a forum to address the challenges and opportunities before us from several different vantage points. We'll discuss the digitization of small businesses and opportunities to facilitate growth with leaders in policy, industry, and trade. Following the main session, we'll offer a masterclass in e-commerce. And in between these insightful discussions, we'll shine a spotlight on some of the unique stories that showcase how small businesses and entrepreneurs are navigating the themes of today while building for the future. So let's get started. I'm now pleased to introduce our first small business spotlight featuring Dana Donofree, founder and CEO of AnaOno, on this morning's first theme, digitization.
I'm Dana Donofree, the founder and CEO of AnaOno. AnaOno is intimates designed differently for those that have undergone breast surgery, often related to a cancer diagnosis. When I was faced with the challenges of so many other millions upon millions of breast cancer survivors and patients, I realized quite quickly that I wasn't the only person that was struggling finding bras after breast cancer, that there were millions of us out there. We launched AnaOno in 2014. We've been in business for a little over 7.5 years. It's really been a beautiful experience to grow not just a business, but a community of people that are empowered to make the right decisions for their health and their well-being. I was one of the first mastectomy bras to be sold direct to customers on the internet. So when I launched all of those years ago, we were already paving a path that was different than our competition. In a lot of ways, I was creating my business at the same time that e-commerce was really emerging and becoming available to most common users. Even though COVID was tough on a lot of companies, I felt very fortunate that we had done a lot of that hard digital work before the pandemic ever hit. The challenge that we faced at AnaOno was that most of our clientele is typically over the age of 50. So this is a demographic that wasn't so used to shopping for their bras and underwear on the internet before the pandemic. And that really put a lot of pressure on a small business. We had to completely redirect all of our energy and attention to a digital environment. If I could make a request to policymakers, it would be keeping in mind these inundated old systems and structures and propelling them into the digital era. The PPP loan process, I think, exposed the challenges of what big corporation was able to do and what small business is able and capable of doing. Years and years and years of documents and filings and operating agreements and these laundry lists of all of these documents that we have to have pulled together in order for an application is a very different scope for a small business to a corporation that has hundreds or thousands of people that sit in these departments doing this every single day. My advice for anybody looking to start their business, either on e-commerce or a consumer product business digitally, is really find those platforms that are going to help make your life easier as early on as you can. So if you're going to start an e-commerce store, look at Shopify. If you are going to ship products, you need a plugin like ShipStation. And of course, to keep all of your accounting in line, you're going to need QuickBooks Online as well. You have to be nimble. You have to be quick. And you're constantly, dodging this moving target of how you're going to manage and run your business on a day-to-day. Unfortunately, the pandemic did not cancel cancer. The stories that really warm my heart, and we fortunately get to hear them very often, is just how grateful and thankful that they can find us on the internet, that our customers are actually able to find what they need, come to a website that speaks their language. And when we hear those stories that come back to us that share the fact that they found a place that gets them, that understands what they need, I have chills all over my body just even saying it, because that to me is what I strive for every day, is just impacting one person's life and changing the way that they view the world. And I'm so grateful that we get to do that.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today. My name is Karen Kerrigan, President and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. My organization, SBE Council, is also a very, very proud member of the Small Business Roundtable. It's an honor to be here, to be a part of this conversation on a topic that is vital to the growth of small business and entrepreneurship globally. And taking Dana's story as just one example, it's clear that digitization is a game changer for today's small businesses, especially in light of the pandemic. At Small Business Roundtable, we continue to see how the acceleration of digitization and changes in customer demand behavior make the difference for small businesses. In fact, a survey conducted by Facebook and Small Business Roundtable found that in light of the pandemic, 51% of small businesses reported increasing online interactions with clients and their customers, while 36% of personal businesses that use online tools indicated that they were conducting all their sales online in response to the crisis. Small businesses that utilized digital tools intensively and leveraged online sales using payment, delivery, social, and productivity tools were less likely to experience economic hardships and were better prepared to weather financial strains. This digital safety net has acted as a lifeline for small businesses, empowering them to continue operating, to quickly respond to new opportunities in the marketplace and globally, and more effectively evolve with the new normal, more so than less digitally savvy small businesses. Governments are also taking action to support SMEs to go digital. This year, the UK announced that it would enact a Help to Grow digital scheme aimed at boosting productivity and innovation in SMEs across the whole of the UK. In today's environment, digital is a must for small and medium enterprises, and their success also depends on government's ability to keep pace with and support digital innovation in small business operations. And that is why I'm so excited to be able to moderate this panel today, to have a cross-section of small business policy, industry, trade experts, and government leaders joining today's conversation on our panel, Trendsetting in Entrepreneurship, How Digital Made the Difference. So let me introduce all these fantastic panel members. First, we have Liz Barclay, Commissioner Barclay, the UK Small Business Commissioner. In July, she was appointed to the role to spearhead the national effort to crack down on poor payment practices, which cause thousands of small businesses to close every year. Liz is the first female Small Business Commissioner, a post created in 2016 to help small businesses secure the payments owed to them and to galvanize UK businesses behind a new culture of prompt and fair payment. Next, we have Ramiro Cavazos, President and Chief Executive Officer of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and a very, very active member of the Small Business Roundtable. The U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce is an organization that actively promotes the economic growth, development, and interests of more than 4.7 million Hispanic-owned businesses that combined contribute over $800 billion to the American economy every year. Next, we have Dr. Barbara Kachwar. She is Executive Director of the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute, where she leads a team of fellows and sets the research agenda to advance the international exchange of policy ideas on fostering digital equity and inclusion, unlocking growth through trade, and imagining an opening future for payments. And finally, our panel would not be complete without Caitlin Wilkins, a Vice President of Global Small Business Sales at Facebook. She and her team help millions of small businesses advertise worldwide to connect with their customers and grow through personalized advertising on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. So welcome to all of you. And I look forward to this conversation. And I would normally begin with directed questions, and to be sure, and that will be coming. But I think the digitization of small business activity over the last 18 months has been transformative for small businesses, for our economy generally, and we should begin there. So going down the line, I'd like to ask each of you to respond to this, and or basically ask each of you to share what you have seen in terms of trends as it relates to businesses going digital. And Liz Barclay, I will begin with you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. It's a real joy to be here and meet everyone. We are finding very similar trends in the UK to those that you've already mentioned. Our small businesses, particularly the smallest of the small, before the pandemic, we're probably about 52% digital. 48% still hadn't adopted and embraced digital. But of course, that changed, as you said, during the pandemic. And I think those of us who were working with small businesses were quite surprised at the fact that fewer small businesses went to the wall than we imagined might do so. And I think that was down to that digital adoption in many, many cases. It just proved how resilient small businesses are because they have the ideas, they're innovative, they're not scared to take the risks. And so at the point that they were faced with possible annihilation through the pandemic, they went for it. They were nimble, they were agile, they embraced technology, they came up with new business models, they applied new ideas, they found new customers, they found new ways of serving their old previous customers. And we're expecting that to stick. We're expecting that to be the trend of the future. And I think reports showed, and many people said that anecdotally, we did 5 years of digital adoption in ever so many weeks, probably around about the first 12 weeks of the pandemic. So it was a really fast adoption. But of course, if the tools hadn't been available and we hadn't been in 4G with 5G coming, then we probably wouldn't have been in that position. So, but we still have a long way to go. And we must not forget that, because there are still a lot of small businesses that realize they must go digital. We have got something called Making Tax Digital coming through the system in about 2 years' time. That will mean that everybody has to do their tax reporting digitally. So the smallest of small businesses will find that that's an impetus. They haven't already adopted technology. They've got to do that. So we expect this to carry on for the next several years.
Right. Those are excellent observations. And, I guess what we've said in many of our members is that, this has sort of been the silver lining of the pandemic, is the discovery of technology and tools and all these innovative ways and tools that have allowed small businesses to operate more effectively, efficiently, and to reach out to customers and to find new markets, et cetera. In an owner survey that we did, 85% of small businesses said they would not have been able to survive without all these technology tools and innovations. So, Ramiro, I'm going to turn it over to you next for your observations.
Well, what we've seen is the data proves out that when you look at the 62 million plus Latinos living in the U.S., this is a population that the median age is 30. And 1 out of every 5 people living in the U.S. are Latino or self-identify as Hispanic. The average age of non-Latino whites is 50. And so these are digital natives. 6 out of every 10 millennials living in this country are Hispanic. So this is a vibrant, fast-growing, innovative population that naturally was already connected to the digital and technology tools that we're living in. And so when the pandemic hit, it was an adjustment that everyone needed to be made, because this is a community that also is on the front lines providing healthcare, direct services, retail, food related, and also tech and low tech businesses. So this is a community that is very positive about the future post-pandemic, higher percentage than other communities. And it's a very diverse community. We are a community that is Afro-Latino, Asian Latino, Caucasian, white Latino, and LGBTQ, and is highly educated, and business success is a higher percentage from a failure standpoint than the rest of the population. So we're getting that story out. We're embracing the future post-pandemic, because the digital environment by our community is one that is part of the DNA already.
That optimism is so great to hear, Ramiro. And I think we all need to hear that, given, so there's certainly, challenges that many small businesses continue, to navigate currently. Still some uncertainties. Obviously, there's some supply chain issues and things like that. But again, technology has been the solution and the answer across the board to many of these challenges. So Dr. Kachwar, we're going to go to you next.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be part of this panel. You know, Visa is very excited to be a member of the Small Business Roundtable, and thank you so much for inviting us. We're at the Economic Empowerment Institute, we've been studying this as well. We've looked at thousands of small businesses across the world, some in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. Our most recent survey was on the United States, and we're really seeing similar trends to what you've observed. Karen, you mentioned in the introduction that there's been an unprecedented transition to e-commerce and to digital payments. And we're really seeing this. And I agree with Commissioner Barkley that many of these changes are likely to stay. And that makes it even more important to think about how to help small businesses not only weather the pandemic, but continue to prosper, to work resiliently, and to really adapt the technologies to meet their needs. We know that this time has been very difficult for many small entrepreneurs who are navigating the challenges associated with e-commerce, particularly those who are not digital natives, who face challenges in, for example, the cybersecurity area for the first time for some of them. And I think that, you know, we need to recognize that and take that seriously and think about how both businesses and the public sector can help them with those challenges. Now, on the other hand, I really share Mr. Cavazos's optimism, and that's reflected in a lot of what we're seeing in talking to these small businesses. The transition presents some really exciting opportunities for these businesses to reach new customers and markets, and quite a number of new businesses have started in order to take advantage of those opportunities. Picking up on that trend, we've actually seen a growth in the number of new small businesses. This has been really well documented in the United States, where monthly new business applications have seen a historic high over the past 18 months. You've seen this in other parts of the world as well, especially in some countries in Europe and in Latin America. So we have a whole new class of digitally native entrepreneurs who have entered this realm, either out of necessity or opportunity. And looking at these firms, we've seen a couple of kind of interesting trends. We saw that firms that have been formed in the past year are more likely than firms that started before the pandemic to be headed by women, which is interesting. And we saw that in a number of geographies in the United States as well. In the US, there also seems to have been a trend in the rise in minority-owned women-led firms. And I suspect that some of the members of Mr. Cavazos's chamber have seen something similar. And another interesting thing we saw with these firms is that, digitization and e-commerce makes it kind of levels the playing field for small firms to be able to export. It cuts down the number of procedures that small firms need to take. It's much easier. It expands the market scope. It expands the reach. And we've really seen that. We've seen that these firms, these minority-owned firms and these women-led firms are starting to export to more markets, and they're exporting to more and different markets than traditional firms. Now, we need to do more research to understand the confluence of factors behind these findings. That said, it's exciting to see this spike in innovation and entrepreneurship. And at Visa, we're interested to see how digital payments can help to make this possible and to help these entrepreneurs really continue to succeed. Recognizing that the transition hasn't been easy for all small business owners, I'd argue that on net, they've been positive for individuals, for communities, and for the global economy. And I'm really excited to see the business community, academics, and policymakers working together to continue to digitally enable small businesses and help ensure that they continue to grow and thrive. And I think that this panel is such an important, part of that conversation. So thank you so much for for having us and for holding this and for all of the great work that you do.
Dr. Cottrell, I am so glad that you brought up, that the whole, this whole issue of just the boost in entrepreneurship, that we've seen. I mean, the numbers in 2020 were off the charts compared to 2019 pre-pandemic. So when you do have, sort of these cataclysmic events or these type of transformative events in our economy, there's a lot of individuals that see opportunity out there. And I think that speaks to the resiliency of, the spirit of people, those who want to become entrepreneurs are seeing that opportunity, they're taking it. And they're seeing it in sectors like, for example, retail and online retail. So there's lots of, they see that there's a lot of competitive opportunity out there. And again, that just speaks to the importance of, and I know we're going to get this later, of policies and government, supporting a lot of these new entrepreneurs, particularly in this digital space, given the closure that we saw of a lot of businesses due to the pandemic. So thank you for bringing that up. That is, again, just sort of another one of those silver linings, of the pandemic. So Caitlin, we're going to move to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, the harsh reality of going last is I think you guys really,
the W.
Yes, you guys have very much covered like so many of the big trends that we're seeing globally. So I would echo, first what's been shared here in terms of the speed and permanence of digital transformation and the way it's helping small businesses. I'll add, I think that while digital is definitely helping to drive the SMB recovery is really that backbone. We're not out of the woods yet. The number of SMBs who say they can continue to operate for the next 6 or 12 months is steadily ticking upwards, which is such a positive sign. But this holiday period that we're about to come into is absolutely critical for a lot of small businesses' survival as this pandemic heads into year 2. Karen, the Facebook State of Small Business report that you mentioned, showed that in the US, 17% of SMBs expect to make over 50% of their annual revenues in the final 3 months of the year. And that number is even higher for diverse-owned small businesses. So 34% and 29% of Black and Hispanic-led SMB respondents say that they're going to be making half their sales during this holiday time. So digital is the new normal for sure, but the continuously changing market conditions around COVID globally 2 years on, I think is still really challenging small business fundamentals on cash flow and staffing and stability. So, the education and partnership and, systemic and governmental support just remains so critical in terms of how we support this newly digital world of SMBs.
Well, it sounds like, at least in the US, we need to start Small Business Saturday much earlier. It begins
every Saturday, Small Business Saturday.
That's right. And that's what we've done. I think the whole, just sort of the support of small and local business generally, what Small Business Saturday has done, broadly speaking, in terms of supporting small businesses. Sure. So, Caitlin, I'm going to start with you since you went last.
Yeah.
Facebook plays several roles as it relates to growing digitization, obviously. And indeed, we've done some compelling research, the Small Business Roundtable with Facebook that I mentioned earlier. Can you talk about the varied ways from marketplace to advertising to even the rise of the influencer economy, how Facebook is shaping small business digital growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. Facebook got strong signal on this trend very early on because we were able to quickly see, a spike in the number of businesses that were signing up for Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, as well as a spike in businesses advertising on the platform. But it wasn't your typical surge. I think as we started to cover earlier on, these are small businesses moving from offline to online for the very first time. And we knew we needed to do more to meet folks where they were, and candidly, to do it while pivoting our own tactics for how we engage small businesses in the online space. And so a big focus for us was really just helping businesses get online. There are more than 200 million businesses that use Facebook's free products and services to connect with customers. So to reach and empower them, we did a lot. The first thing is, evolving our Facebook for Business hub to include resources and turnkey partnerships with e-commerce platforms like Shopify, WooCommerce, and Wix, just to help people make a website for the first time. That's a hugely complicated thing to do. If you're a sole proprietor or working at a very small, small business. And alternatively, for those who are using our platforms as their digital front door, we invested a lot in terms of improving functionality for our free products. So the ability to quickly update business hours, take online reservations, promote curbside pickup, sell gift cards as a new revenue stream, and more. And then, really had to think about how we refreshed trainings. Facebook often started with advertising, and we really backed up the bus, with Facebook Blueprint and other resources to teach people how to get and stay online first. And then later think about how do you scale or advertise and continue to grow and accelerate as a digital small business. I grew up in Michigan, so I'll tell you a quick story about a company based in Detroit that went through this transformation. It's called the Lush Yummy Pie Company. And when the pandemic hit, Jennifer Lyle, who's the store's owner, was selling primarily through retail. And overnight, she had to figure out how to sell online and shift her entire business model to direct to consumer. And so she used Facebook to promote pie drops, where customers could come into the bakery at a certain time and pick pies up directly from her. She kept in touch with customers through Messenger and started to, build, stronger relationships that way. And then also, used ads to appeal to new customers in her area and drive volume for herself. And so thanks to, a lot of the digitization that we're talking about, businesses like hers, have continued to boom throughout the pandemic. And I think, as all have been saying, this is really a permanent diversification in terms of the way that small businesses are operating.
That's fabulous. And Ramiro, I want to bring you in at this point for you to talk about your membership, American Latinx businesses, the impacts that you've seen, these type of impacts in the businesses that you represent and the business owners that you talk to.
Well, Karen, thank you again for moderating this great panel. Appreciate everybody's contributions. For our members, we have 5 million Hispanic-owned members who are members of their local chamber. We have 260 Hispanic chambers from Honolulu to Puerto Rico and all 50 states. Again, fast-growing population. Each of our chambers became an emergency room for small businesses, to connect them to capital, to help them with their Paycheck Protection Program loans, the EIDL, the restaurant revitalization program. And this community was very stoic that I represent. They just did their work. They worked in their environment and didn't often ask for resources or help. This is a community that clearly over the years has also been discriminated against when it comes to small business loans. 8 out of 10 applicants in the Latino community applying to a bank were turned down for loans even before the pandemic. So there was a lot of adversity that had to be overcome. So when the pandemic hit, most people would think, well, this disruption is really going to get in the way. But quite frankly, the pandemic actually rolled out the red carpet for many of our businesses who needed to use digital tools like Facebooks and other corporations that were free to make sure that they had the resources that they needed. They went to their local chamber to build that network, to find out how to access capital. And so if anything, what we noticed through our chambers, we didn't lose one Hispanic chamber. The business closures were temporary, and then they were brought back in through small business grants or chamber grants, and through the federal government also, the Minority Business Development Agency, the Small Business Administration. Less than 1,000 SBA certified lenders before the pandemic. Now there are more than 5,000. Community banks got in the picture. Fintechs got into the picture and became top 10 access to capital. The final point is this: if anything, the pandemic that we experienced and are still growing out of has cleared the path forward for entrepreneurs to be innovative, to try new things, and to take risks that they would have never taken, because the stakes are so high right now, as you all know, when it comes to health and also survivability. So entrepreneurs are survivors to begin with. And we have seen that our chambers, all of them around the country, became economic oasis for their local communities. And so our biggest strength was our network of national Latino chambers to help small businesses, especially Latinos businesses, Latinx businesses, get back on their feet.
That's great, Romero. And yes, and it fabulous how the chamber, Hispanic chamber, responded, to this crisis, and really, connecting the dots, for your members, and really taking advantage of both private sector resources and innovation, but also, the government's big help in this regard too. But it does take a lot, to help small businesses navigate through that. And we'll get a little bit more to the government's role later in a little bit. Liz, I'm coming to you in 1 second, but I'm going to ask Dr. Kashwar a question here, or a couple of questions. With an increasing number of SMBs embracing e-commerce and digital payments, can you tell us what challenges and opportunities this rise presents for small businesses? And what does Visa Economic Empowerment Institute research tell us about how to best support and to enable entrepreneurs and SMBs in this new digital first, which is quickly becoming a digital first global economy?
Right. Thank you. That's a great question, and I suspect there are lots of thoughts about this. As we've talked about on this panel, transitioning to e-commerce and digital payments isn't easy, particularly for some populations. We have heard from several small businesses that have really been able to survive as a result of being able to accept digital payments, who were reluctant to do so before because of age and cultural factors, a lack of knowledge, and who had to adopt digital payments in order to survive, and did so really resiliently, and are now grateful and happy that they did so. But it was a big jump. And so when you look at, Ramiro talked about the Hispanic millennials in the United States. We had a small business in Mexico who was not a millennial. He was quite a bit older. He started a restaurant just a couple of months before the pandemic hit. He wasn't planning to accept digital payments, but Visa helped him do so, and he's very happy he did so. But he did show some trepidation. So, for some groups, it's really a big kind of jump to move to this. And one of the things that folks need to think about is how to really reach out to these different communities and make sure that different groups are comfortable and have the tools that help them, make the best out of their situation and really thrive and survive. There's a wide range of ways that both the business sector and the public sector and the thought leader sector can really support SMBs. Just to highlight two really telling findings from our recent research. One, we found that the main really concrete result that we found that held across the world, and we looked at firms in Mexico and Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Africa, the US, we're doing similar studies in Dubai and soon in the UK, is that across the board, small business owners expressed a strong preference for assistance with digitization, even over additional loans or grants. And I think that really speaks to the need to think about how to customize assistance so that companies in different sectors and at different levels of digital awareness are able to seamlessly transition. So it's really heartening, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Commissioner Barclay is going to speak about in terms of what the UK is planning to do. And it's great to see, across the world, similar positions being created in this type of assistance being given to small businesses. And I think this answer, you really just, underscores how important e-commerce and digital payments is to those small entrepreneurs. It points also to some really concrete opportunities for businesses and for policymakers and academia to try to make an immediate difference. So my colleagues on the business side at Visa Inc. are stepping up to help this important community. Visa pledged last year to digitally enable 50 million small businesses across the globe. I think just a week ago or so, they announced that they've already reached 16 million, so about a third of that goal, and are enthusiastically moving forward. We've also revamped and kind of bolstered our small business hub, which gives access to a number of tools, similar to what our colleagues at Facebook were talking about. Really some of the basics, helping small businesses learn how to set up their websites, how to do business. And what's also really important is sort of the supplementary financial literacy education. We have a program that we call Practical Money Skills and one that we call Practical Business Skills. This is all online, it's all free, and it's just really important to have this sort of contextual, continuous learning and tools made available.
That's all great. At 50 million, wow, connecting 50 million small businesses to e-payments, that is just fabulous. Great work by Visa. Liz, a really simple question for you. How does government play a role in this? I mean, I know you've been doing a lot over in the UK, but what is the government's role, and how do you play a role in this?
Well, I'm part of the government's role because my office was set up under the Enterprise Act in 2016, and we actually launched in 2017. And our role is to get payments to small businesses as quickly as possible. It's to make sure that small businesses are confident enough and capable enough to say, no, I can't wait 4 months to get paid for this piece of work that I'm doing now. I need it much quicker than that. It's about persuading bigger businesses that actually their small suppliers can't survive, can't wait for 4 months to get paid. They need to get those payments more quickly, and change that culture so that everybody's working to get those small and micro businesses that we've just been talking about paid as quickly as possible, so that they have the certainty. They know when the money is going to come in. That means they can invest. That means they can think about training. It means they can think about recruitment and job creation. And that's hugely, hugely important, because it's the small, the micro businesses that are really driving recovery here. And just to pick up on a point that Barbara made earlier, we have about, we think we might even make the record 1 million new small businesses in the UK this year. And that would be the biggest number ever. Now, the question, of course, is, are they setting up out of necessity, or are they setting up because this is a chance in a lifetime? But actually, most of those people setting up will understand digital tools and digital adoption, and will probably come with them because they'll have been coming out of an employment environment where bigger businesses have already put that digital adoption in place. So the chances are we're going to see more people coming ready to do business in that way. We've got to be careful, though, because sometimes the infrastructure isn't quite up to it. A woman said to me the other day, I run all of my business completely from my smartphone. The only problem is sometimes I have to stand in a field in order to, so we've still got ways to go. But the government is also thinking very much about levelling up. So how do we take some of our poorer areas where our local small businesses can really make the difference, and think about how we level up the environment so that they can create the jobs, follow their dreams, come up with the ideas and the inventions that will take us into the next period of growth and recovery. So there's that leveling up. There's also the building back better. How do we build back better? How do we make sure that everybody has access to the tools that we've been talking about, for instance? And that's one of the things that we have done, is come up with the Help to Grow scheme. Now, the Help to Grow scheme is about management skills on one hand and digital skills on the other. And it is thinking about how do we help those businesses that aren't already really business savvy and don't have the management skills to get those skills, and how do we help the businesses that need digital software, etc., that they haven't been able to afford previously, and the skills that they haven't acquired previously. How do we help them to gain those over the next few years and really drive forward on that digital front? So the government is playing a big role. And of course, on the payment front, we've already got our open banking and open banking driven tools that we've been putting in place over the last 4 years in order to make sure that financing is easier, payments are easier, more seamless, quicker, less friction in the system. So with those measures, I think the government is fairly determined that small businesses, and I think this is probably for the first time that small businesses have really been seen to be at the heart of this. Yes, we've said they're the lifeblood, but I think there's a growing recognition of that over the pandemic.
Well, all your work has been fantastic, Liz. Thank you very much. And I know the UK government has been doing a lot to champion small businesses. For example, the transatlantic small business dialogues have been great forums. Ramiro, the kind of program that Liz describes in the UK, is that something here in the US we could be building from, a program like that, of that model? How would that impact your membership?
Well, most of our members are small businesses, of course, Karen, and we're honored to be a part of the Small Business Roundtable. More than 30 million businesses in America are small. Government is a big economic generator, not just when it comes to regulations or policies or monetary flexibility, setting interest rates, but purchases, procurement. The U.S. government, for example, is the largest buying service in the world. We all think about Fortune 1000 firms, and yes, they're huge juggernauts when it comes to purchases. But the fact of the matter is, less than 7% of the U.S. government's purchases in the trillions and multi-trillions of dollars go to small, minority, and women-owned businesses. So big business does very well with the U.S. government, but small business does not. And this quick pay program is so important also because our businesses also not only are challenged about, getting that contract, but also they don't have the funds in reserve to last more than 30 days for payment. So we can do a better job in the U.S. government and the private sector to do business with Hispanic-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. After all, these businesses, if you look at the data from the Great Recession of 2008, small business was 50% of the reason of how we rebuilt from the recession 13 years ago. The other half of those businesses, I know Caitlin mentioned, and Dr. Kochwar, trade was a big part of the rebuilding. And what better business than a Hispanic-owned business that, like in Europe, as you know, Liz, Latinos speak multiple languages, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and other languages. These are not cultural affinities. These are business tools today in how we interface with the rest of the world when it comes to trade and commerce. And Latin America is a huge marketplace, and Europe, where it's largely unexplored by U.S. business, especially small business. So I believe a big part of our rebuilding will not just be the government putting out guidelines and policies that are helpful to business, but also making sure that every cabinet secretary has a spend goal. He or she needs to do their part. I'm glad to see that our president, Biden, has passed an executive order to put a goal of 15% for purchases with small, minority, and women-owned businesses compared to 5%, which was there before. So there's a lot of work to be done with certification. The big three for us are access to capital, contracts, and capacity. And so that's our focus at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And we're proud that the chair of our board is a woman, and 2/3 of our board members are female. And so our decision making is driven by women entrepreneurs and private sector leaders that not only have that intuition of where we need to go, but also have the affinity for making sure that we open up those doors of opportunity. So no question, Karen, we should be doing more, and we should be doing better to give small businesses more business. That's part of the rebuilding of our economy.
And just real quickly, Ramiro, in terms of the combination of digital marketplaces, digital financial services, impacting Hispanic businesses. Anything else, on that front, that you'd like to add?
Well, the only thing I'd like to add is that this is an economy that's the 7th largest economy in the world. And so it is driven by digital and innovation and technology. There are, as I mentioned, 65 million Hispanic people living in America. This population has a GDP of $2.6 trillion alone as a population. It is larger than the whole economy of India with 1.3 billion people. So if we don't do business with these digital natives, younger population that's innovative, we're missing a great opportunity to do business with the 7th largest economy in the world if it were its own country. So this, and 80% of these Americans living here were born and raised here. The narrative out there about immigrant businesses being the only business within the Latino community, that does exist, and that's where innovation comes. But it's the 80% of this population that, like myself, 7th generation Texan, this is an economy that we helped build starting more than 500 years ago. The last point I would make, Karen, is that the U.S. symbol, the dollar sign, came from the Spanish peseta. That's why it is S, and the 2 bars is one stands for silver and one stands for gold. But the monetary system during the American colonial period came from the Hispanic community, from the Spanish who settled a big part of this nation first next to our Native Americans. So the monetary system has been driven by this community, and it's time that we realize that this is a community that needs to be leveraged and supported through business and resources.
Ramiro, I learn something new every day that we're in a room or on a panel together. Thank you for all those wonderful comments. I think the conversation, and certainly some of the things that Ramiro touched upon, they segue very nicely to a policy question that has been front and center during the last 18 months. And this is sort of our last round of questions for everyone. Almost every statistic that measures such outcomes has found that underserved populations, particularly minorities and women, are being negatively impacted much more significantly from COVID and the resulting economic crisis. Now, for all of you, how can we prioritize recovery and resilience for these populations? And what, if any, role do these digitization and digital financial services play in that? And Caitlin, I'm going to begin with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think this conversation spot on. The biggest trend we've seen, hands down, around the world is that women in diverse-owned businesses were hardest hit by the pandemic. And the good news is that they're recovering, but the recovery is happening more slowly than non-diverse businesses. Ramiro, you touched on this a bit. The Facebook State of Small Business Report was global. We surveyed 35,000 small businesses in 30 countries. And the stats were consistent. And so, a couple of numbers here to back up the great conversation. 40% of diverse-owned businesses reported challenges to cash flow as of this fall. And that's compared to 29% of the overall, SMB group. This has huge downstream impacts for small businesses. We saw 32% of diverse-owned businesses have reported reducing size in their workforce compared with 20% of overall SMBs. So these kinds of things are impacting the recovery speed for female and diverse-owned businesses. I am so excited, on the trends we're seeing in terms of new businesses that are owned by females and diverse populations. And so, tech companies like Facebook are really leaning in to intentionally support that, as well as the broader SMB, transformation and recovery. So, at Facebook, we're focused, Ramiro, on a lot of what you mentioned, which is like access, skills, and capital. So it's not just leaning in to help around the product and service that we provide at Facebook in terms of advertising. So, we have a program called Facebook Elevate, which is focused on Black and Hispanic SMBs. The foundation of it is not just advertising, but mentoring, networking, and free training. we want really doubling down on helping to close the skills gap. So, Facebook is funding 100,000 scholarships to close those gaps. And we're also looking at, innovative ways to help SMBs and diverse-owned SMBs, especially with cash flow, like buying outstanding invoices so that these SMBs can have more cash on hand to operate through these, difficult months and ride strong into the holiday period, which we mentioned earlier is going to be so critical. So I think, the lesson for us is, you really can't think about SMBs as a monolith, and we need to continue to understand the ways in which organizations like ours are uniquely positioned to help comprehensively, not just around our own product and service areas.
Well, thank you, Caitlin, for all the work at Facebook in helping SMBs through their pain points and also seeing the opportunities in the marketplace. Thank you so much.
It's so exciting.
Yes, it is. Dr. Kachwar, you're next.
Great. Well, I think, Caitlin has covered a lot of ground as has everybody, but I think it's such an important question. And I think even, there's a lot of optimism in the numbers and what we're seeing in the trends. But I think that, several panelists have said we need to kind of counter that with the realism, looking at the trends for the next couple of months, and also looking at the impacts on these diverse populations. We know that women and minority-owned businesses have been hardest hit, and these populations have been hardest hit throughout the pandemic as well. And this is one of the reasons that some of what we've seen in the uptick in small businesses. And I think the lesson here is that we really need to focus both on the small businesses that have arisen out of opportunity, those that have great ideas for how to use digitization to innovate and to better serve the emerging needs of the modern economy. But we also really need to think about how to help those that arose out of necessity, which can be just as innovative and which are also still, really have the opportunity to form the backbone of a recovery in the same way as we saw in a previous crisis. And so it's really a moment to look at policies that can help these communities that have had such barriers put in their place, that see an opportunity, that have started businesses. How can we continue that? The business sector is doing some part to help digitize businesses, for example. At Visa, we have some programs with Black Girl Ventures, for example. We have our Visa Everywhere initiative, and She's Next, where we mentor women-owned businesses. This is all important, but what's really important also is to make sure that the public sector and the private sector continue to work together just to make sure that these businesses can survive and thrive and help the economy recover. And conversations like this, Karen, and asking those questions are just so important. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kachwar. You're right. There's so many people that started businesses out of necessity that have become regional and global brands, right?
Right.
So, and thanks to Visa for recognizing this and what we're seeing now in the growth of entrepreneurship and the support that you all provide to entrepreneurs and small businesses everywhere. So, and Liz, you're going to get to close out the panel here with your thoughts.
Well, I know that our government departments that are not just our Department of Business, but our Cabinet Office, our Treasury, they all have small business advisory panels and groups. And so they are listening to people on the ground who are running small businesses as well as representative organizations, etc. And I think that's really important. But 1 million out of our 6 million businesses are ethnic minority led. And that creates £74 billion a year for the economy and employs 10% of our workforce. So this is not a small number of businesses that we're talking about here. So we need to make sure that access to all our procurement of our public sector spend, which Ramiro pointed to earlier, and I think this is very important, we need to make sure that that is open to those businesses. and many of those are women-led. And of course, there are other businesses in addition that are women-led. We need to give those support. We need to open up the public sector. What am I trying to say? Contracts for women and ethnic minority-led businesses. And the government has long had an aspiration to make sure that small businesses had about 30% of those contracts. And we've not quite got there yet. In fact, I think we have quite a long way to go because the procurement system is so complicated. So this is where the digitization comes in. If we can use good technical digital tools in order to make that procurement system much simpler for many of those small businesses, because the pushback is that we haven't got the time and resources, we haven't got the people. There's only three of us. We haven't got, one person cannot go out for 3 months in order to work on a procurement, a pitch for a contract. So we've got to make that much, much easier. And we've also got to, and I've been talking this afternoon about this very issue, and I have been told that what we have to do is make sure that the major contractors that are working on these government contracts have those same principles and that same ethos that the government does, that they want to increase the number of those contracts that go to small businesses. But underlying all of this, what I am told is that cash is king. Small businesses prefer not to have their invoices bought. They prefer to get the payments in on time. And constantly I am told, just do your job, stick to your knitting, make sure we get those payments. I don't think prompt is the right word. I think quickly would be a much better word. We need to get those payments very quickly into the bank accounts of those small businesses once the work is done, because that's what will give the certainty. Lack of certainty leads to mental health issues. It leads to stress and depression and anxiety, which leads to a drop in productivity. And we really, really need to make sure that the money is forthcoming as soon as the work is done, so that we can get out there the 6 million, almost 6 million small businesses, and innovate and take those risks and create those jobs and help to drive the recovery.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for that, very inspirational final words from the panel. And thank you too for focusing on, we talked a lot about, the private sector and small businesses being forced on the digitization front, but there's a lot that government can do on this front as well that would make it a lot easier for small businesses in their engagement with the government sector, particularly on the procurement front. So thank you for bringing that up as well. So let me end by saying there is clearly a scope and space here for greater adoption of digital tools to help enhance small business productivity and growth. And this wonderful group of panelists has truly set the stage for what comes next. These are cross-industry, cross-border conversations we need to continue to have to truly support entrepreneurial growth everywhere. And let me just thank all of you, our great panelists, for taking the time to join the conversation today. So thank you all.
Pleasure.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Be safe and take care.
My name is Allison DeVane. I am the founder and owner of Teaspressa. I love entrepreneurship, and the reason why I started a business was because I just love being challenged. And I thought there was no other occupation in the entire world that would challenge me as much as being an entrepreneur. I founded Teaspressa 5 years ago, actually, on a laundry cart in the streets of Phoenix. We have a patent on making tea like espresso. So it's very, very similar to your lattes, Americanos, and cappuccino, except for picture a tea shot that has just as much caffeine and has the health benefits of tea. So with everything happening, we've had to go through some difficult things like furloughing employees. We've had to close down our shops. Right now, I'm sitting in a shop that's been closed for 2 weeks, and we're going to be continuing closed for who knows how long. We're permanently closing locations. Even with those negatives, I'm still focusing on the positives. If anything, I've learned through this whole process to go back to the roots of why I started this company, why I do what I do every day, why I show up. As a small business owner, honestly, I didn't even know we could be heard by policymakers. Having that trip to DC made me realize that this is a possibility and that I should be using my voice more and advocating more for small businesses, and that it is a possibility. And this is a piece of advice I give to any small business owner out there, is to have a mentor and have other fellow entrepreneur peers to talk to on a regular basis. You would be so surprised. I shouldn't be so surprised, but I was really surprised to see how willing others wanted to help you and how open other people are about, yeah, I went through this, or yes, we did that. It was crazy and it wasn't ideal, but you know, it's amazing. And so once I kind of learned how to ask for help, and also learned the more real or honest you are about asking for your help, the more help you'll receive. And so now I just kind of like lay it how it is. I'm like, this is what we're looking at. These are my financials. It's not looking so good. I don't know if we're gonna make this. And then, you know, to my surprise, other people are like, oh, you are in a great position. I would do X, Y, and Z and do that. It's a very enriching thing to be connected with other women in business. Women are so strong, so versatile, and so just inspiring. And so most of my network, a majority of my network and business peers are women-owned businesses, which they're, from my experience, have been selfless, more than willing to help. And when it comes to anything I'm doing, they're like, here's a spreadsheet, here's all the answers, this is what I did, I hope it goes great for you.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to address you today at the inaugural Entrepreneurship Exchange, and to briefly share with you what the Australian government is doing to support small business and the digital economy. It's estimated that the digital innovation will deliver around $315 billion in gross economic value to Australia over the next decade. Now, as the Minister for the Digital Economy, my role is to champion the digital economy, but also to ensure that our ambitions match the extraordinary opportunities that are within our reach. And in my role as Minister for Women's Economic Security, I also focus on maximising the immense opportunities for female economic participation and entrepreneurship within the digital economy to help us realise those national goals. We know that small and medium enterprises are the engine room of the Australian economy, contributing over $422 billion each year, and that's around 1/3 of our economy. And often these businesses form the bedrock of our local communities in the cities and in the regions. Now, they have also been one of the hardest hit during the pandemic, but in the face of adversity, we've also seen incredible resilience and transformation. In the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, 1/4 of Australian businesses changed the way that they operate, and 1/4 changed what they provide. Technology has enabled businesses, communities, and individuals to stay afloat, to access critical services, and to remain connected in these uncertain times. So now we must build on that momentum. The digital economy is a fundamental part of our nation's roadmap for economic recovery, and small and medium enterprises will play a vital role. In May of this year, I was very pleased to be able to stand alongside the Prime Minister to launch the government's digital economy strategy as part of this year's budget. It's the Morrison government's $1.2 billion plan for Australia to become a world-leading digital economy and society by 2030. A key growth priority of the strategy is to lift digital capability and adoption across small and medium enterprises to support new ways to work and to grow, to increase profitability and to save time. For example, we've committed $15.3 million to enhancing the value of e-invoicing to help businesses reduce costs and increase productivity. Around 90% of invoices remain labour intensive, even though a transition to e-invoices can save businesses up to $20 in cost savings per invoice, not to mention the improvement in payment times to SMEs. We're also investing in programs to support small and medium enterprise uptake in emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and advanced analytics. We have pathways to support growth internationally, leveraging the government's international digital trade agreements and relationships with regulators, industry, and investors abroad. And we're also looking at how we can support emerging industry sectors, for example, the games industry, through a 30% games development industry tax offset. And this will boost local industry, it'll attract inbound investment, and it will have flow-on benefits to other sectors due to the attraction and transferability of skilled talent. We're leveraging the trusted relationships that the Australian corporate sector has with small and medium enterprises to promote the adoption of and the use of and access to digital products and services through our Digital Business to Business Partnerships Initiative. And we're expanding the Australian Small Business Advisory Service to support around 17,000 small businesses with advice on how to digitally adopt and adapt over the next 12 months. The digital economy offers so many opportunities for small business to deliver better products, deliver new services, open up global markets, and of course, create new jobs. There are very exciting times ahead. Thank you to Intuit and the Small Business Roundtables for having me today. I'm very keen to continue the conversation as to how we can keep the momentum going to realise the opportunities that are presented by the digital economy. And it's a transformation that I know all Australians and small and medium enterprises can get behind.
Hi, my name is Rachel, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Sade Baron. At Sade Baron, we create body care products that are really high quality and high concentration formulations. And our customers are usually anybody that's looking for natural skincare. In our first year of business, we actually weren't online, and we didn't really consider online a really big part of our business. We did a lot of markets and shows, but when COVID completely shut down the world, we really started doing completely online sales and really relying on that a lot more. That was really nerve-wracking. The first couple months, we didn't know what was happening and what we should do and where we should go. A big thing was also like shipping, right? A lot of people were not getting their shipments on time. So we started really working with a lot of different partners to get people their shipments on time, just because, you're home and you're waiting for your products that you've already purchased. And so what we did is whenever a person ordered something, we'd send them an automatic email saying that we thanked them for that order. And then a day later, we'd send them a note saying, hey, we just want to let you know that we've already started packing your order, but because of what's happening in the world today, we just ask you to be extra patient with us. And a lot of people were really great about that. We didn't realize that we had so many customers, not just outside of Canada, but elsewhere. We've gotten orders from Australia, Germany, France, Portugal. It was a really great opportunity to start learning some of the rules in terms of importing, sending a shipment out to a foreign country that had different rules and tax regulations. We had an accountant that we had met through a QuickBooks event, and so she was really helpful with that. So she had a really good knowledge of taxes in general for a lot of these countries. And then we had worked with a shipping partner that had a lot of understanding of how to clear some of those costs and whatnot for the customer or on behalf of them. So that was really helpful. Our e-commerce platform is Shopify, which is integrated into our QuickBooks Online. So it actually captures all the orders. And then we have an ERP system that allows us to plan production, plan how much units and things that we need. And then also on top of that, we have a system that works with our 3PL to understand where items are being shipped. Because of the restrictions, there was a lot more steps, there was a lot more delays. Staying in touch with government officials, understanding the timelines so that we can set our own expectations, and then we can also manage our own production schedules as well. So in the summer of last year, we were trying to get bottles, PET bottles, 8 ounces, and they were pretty much sold out everywhere. And the reason why they were sold out everywhere was because hand sanitizer was being made, and obviously they need to go in some sort of bottle, and people were buying them in the boatloads. So what we did is we always have some backup suppliers that we work with in Toronto, where we are. And although it's a little bit more expensive, we ended up buying from them as a backup option. It causes a lot of panic because you literally cannot sell more products because you're running out. Like sometimes we have to tell our retailers, listen, we have to pause. We don't have enough units to sell to you. We have to reduce your order because we need to ensure that we have enough products for everybody that we need to sell to. Today, we're doing about twice as much business as we did in 2020 and 4 times as much business as we did in 2019. Regardless of the distribution and supply challenges that we have, we're still working on scaling and ensuring that we can continue growing. The best thing I would say is that we want to scale, but we also want to reach more people at the same time, not just in North America, but in Europe and other parts of the world. And that's where we're currently working on.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. First of all, I want to say that I think that was a wonderful spotlight on what the global means, especially for women and small businesses. But I think also very relevant, it highlights the value of entrepreneurship and small businesses across the world. And I think the relevance for this community to stay together and stay connected. And I think actually it's a great way to go into our panel today, into our fireside chat with global policy leaders, and precisely talk about the importance of staying connected, but as a region. So we're going to talk about the Mexico and US relationship. And for this, I am Emilio Cadena. I'm the CEO of Grupo Prodensa and also the chairman of the board of the US-Mexico Foundation. We are an organization dedicated to foster the understanding between Mexico and the United States as a region. And really, I'm so glad to have 2 great leaders of this international community with us today. And I will make a brief introduction of our 2 panelists right now to make sure that we spend more time listening to them than to their bios, which is very extent. But first, it's great to see you here, Valeria Moy, my great friend. I would say also one of the most relevant voices in Mexico, especially when it comes to competitiveness. Valeria is the CEO of the Mexican Institute for Competitiveness, IMCO. And also she was previously director for an organization, a think tank in Mexico called Mexico Como Vamos, Mexico How We're Doing, which basically is a think tank, and I would say an accountability think tank to make sure that the promises are kept and going forward for progress of Mexico. So great work there. Valeria, great to see you here. And also I'm very honored to meet you, Jake, and to have chatted with you a little bit before this panel. I think it's great that you're part of also of this panel with Valeria. Jake is the president of the National Foreign Trade Council, the leading business association dedicated to advancing the interest of the US companies in international commerce. And also, and I was really impressed by this, Jake, I have to say you're the co-founder of the Global Innovation Forum, which engages global network of small businesses, nonprofit leaders, and government officials to explore the role of technology, which surely we're going to talk about that today, the role of technology and trade policies on programs fostering resilience and inclusive growth, which I thought was fantastic. I did a little bit of research on that, and congratulations on that initiative. I think it's great. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Emilio. Thanks for having me.
And with this, let's get into the conversation immediately. And I will start with you, Valeria. I think just a question for both of you, but we'll give you a chance to talk about this first. On the overall, on your overall opinion on where is entrepreneurship and small and medium-sized enterprises in Mexico under the current social, political, economic scenario?
That's a very small and big question. I mean, that's kind of not fair, but well, let me try to take it by parts. I would divide the whole market, or the whole number of SMEs in Mexico into very big groups. The first one is the majority of the small and medium-sized enterprises in Mexico. These small firms are spread all over the country. They have very few people employed, between 0 and 10. So they are called in Mexico micro firms. They have no technological advances whatsoever. I mean, the biggest or the great technological tool that they use is sometimes they use internet, and that's basically it. They employ a lot of people, millions of people in Mexico. They are very inefficient in the way that we usually define efficiency, but that's the firms that the majority of Mexicans we see and we buy from. The small firm next to my house, the very small firm next to another house in a small town in Mexico. So when we talk about SMEs, it's not a very similar universe. We have to make some divisions because it's not the same. So 94% of firms in Mexico are SMEs. And if we pull on that number, they are micro firms between 0 and 10 employees. And then we have, on the other side, some SMEs that are incredibly efficient, that want to move forward, that want to change the game, that are founded by young people. They are looking for innovation. They are looking for changing the market using technological advances, using blockchain, using fintech, using a lot of things. So we have a huge divide there. We can't talk about the SMEs in Mexico as a whole and integrated group because they are simply, it's not there. I would like for some of these SMEs, the traditional, let me use the term, the traditional SMEs, to become a little bit more specialized. I think many of them won't be able to. I mean, let's just face it, they just won't be able to. But there's a small group that can be, you know, like pushed forward in this technological era. And then we have this very interesting group, and we have to help them. We have to help them via public policy, via financing, via tools, via digitalization, via trade, because we want these small firms that are small now to grow and to have a larger impact on the Mexican economy.
Fantastic. I think, first of all, I think we're never going to have enough time to talk about this. You start, you know, bringing on some subjects. So you know, going a little bit off script here, but I think you talk about the issue of inequality, which I think it's a major issue in the world, which also exists in the SME world, at least in Mexico. The inequality of these SMEs and what would do to them in the future for them. So it's certainly something that we have to think about and do something about it. On this aspect, where do you see SMEs and entrepreneurship in the US? And do you also see this type of gap? And this also, I'm going to say, an incorrect way to putting them, all of them together. I think the SME word itself, it's tricky because it puts the small and the medium-sized enterprises, and as Valeria was saying, also the micro in the same bucket.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Emilio, and thanks to Intuit and Small Business Roundtable for hosting. And Valeria, it's an honor to share the virtual stage with you. Really interesting what you've said already so far. Maybe just let me step back for a moment and say that, you know, Emilio, you mentioned that I co-founded this Global Innovation Forum, and you know, we did that because we really saw about 10 years ago small businesses really taking advantage of the opportunities and facing a lot of challenges in the global marketplace. And so, as I look back over that past 10 years, what I've really seen is kind of that trend of small businesses engaging globally and being more digital. That's really sort of accelerated because of two things. And one is obviously the internet. The internet's been transformative for small businesses, but what it's really done is sort of created this e-commerce ecosystem of tools and services that allows companies, if they so choose, to be digital and then be global by being digital. And so, I mean, you asked, and I know Valeria brought up this idea of kind of inequality among small businesses. And first of all, I completely agree with Valeria that there is a spectrum of size of businesses, and that kind of contributes to their ability to comply with regulations, to be global, to know where to look for help and for resources. But there's also a spectrum with respect to whether the extent to which companies have adopted digital tools or not. And so, as I look out, particularly in light of the pandemic, those companies that have adopted digital tools have been more resilient, been more successful. Their expectations for revenue are 4 times higher than companies that do not use digital tools intensively. And so, I would point to that as a divide. But then I think the other thing that I would say is, as I look out, particularly since the pandemic, it turns out that trade policy and trade programs can kind of enable or prohibit access to that e-commerce ecosystem that is so important for small businesses and consumers these days. And so as I look out to the future and thinking about how we can all make a difference, I think it's promoting that e-commerce ecosystem, that access to digital tools, and working with governments and civil society to make sure that trade policies and trade programs play that kind of enabling and helpful role rather than one that prohibits access to for small businesses and startups.
Thanks, Jake. And I'm going to continue with you and then give Valeria a chance to talk about this next topic. But actually, we made a study with Intuit and IMCO in Mexico to try to analyze the current state of SMEs, especially with a focus, I want to say, on micro, as Valeria was saying. But we discover, I think, I'm going to say something that we've always had the gut feeling, that there is common ground in terms of the main issues that SMEs have. And I think they are international issues. And I think we discovered 3 key aspects of it. One is technology and digitalization. The other one is the policy and facilitation, not only trade, but I want to say the day-to-day administration of SMEs. And then the third one is financing, which is such a big topic that I'm going to try to stay away from it because it deserves its own. But of course, if you want to make a remark in there, you're more than welcome to do it. But let me stay on the first part, the technology and digital. What do you think are the lessons learned, first of all, from the pandemic? Because I think you are right. It emphasized the need to grow and sometimes the need to stay alive during the pandemic. I think especially the first 12 months of technology for micro and small businesses. But what do you think are the lessons learned, the best practices that we can share with the group to see if we can leave some homework there for some of our audience and SMEs on what to work on?
Sure, thanks, Emilio. So I think, the observation is that obviously the use of digital tools increased dramatically, but that, we've seen some statistics that say that 70% of small businesses altered their product offerings in response to the pandemic. And so, they changed up the way that they did things, and I think speaks to a need to be flexible and adaptable. I already talked about how digital savvy small businesses were more resilient and that they anticipate, up to 4 times better revenue than those small businesses that don't use digital tools intensively. Another sort of lesson for us is that there's a correlation between being digital and being global, so that companies who use digital tools more intensively, the statistics and our anecdotes suggest that they have a significantly higher percentage of global business. And that was true before COVID. That's true, in light of COVID. And the other lesson that I would pull out is that being digital and global is particularly important for women and minority-owned businesses and underserved communities. And so here in the United States, there's evidence that suggests that women-owned small businesses benefit from a kind of export premium, which, you know, they have those women-owned businesses that export have higher salaries, they pay higher salaries, they have higher profits, higher revenues. And that's greater than exporting businesses that are owned by men and by women-owned businesses that don't export. If you look at during the pandemic, Black-owned US small businesses relied on global markets for almost 50% more revenue than white-owned businesses during the pandemic. And so, you know, being digital and being global can particularly elevate sort of inclusiveness and for Black and minority and women-owned small businesses. I would say just very briefly that the last lesson is that, you know, despite all of this, there's a danger that trade and tax policies could move in the wrong direction. And so, you know, we can get into that later.
Yeah, we will. We certainly will. Let me tweak a little bit the question, Valeria, because I think first, I think there is not enough understanding in Mexico what digital and technology mean. I think is well beyond, you know, just being located in the map, so people can see where your business are, and maybe even e-commerce. So beyond that, so what you can share with us on that, on what technology and digital mean for SMEs in Mexico. And then I think to Jake's point, do you see Mexican companies being able to adopt these technologies and then using the global market? I think especially on the services side, I think there is a huge potential. You and I have talked about industry in Mexico, and the export market of industry is really the driver of the Mexican economy, but we're really leaving out all these huge market where I think SMEs can play much better than in industry for the global market.
I mean, I think that you're addressing a very important point. In Mexico, some SMEs, when we talk about technology, they think e-commerce. I mean, that's basically it. It's like, how technologically advanced is your, I don't know, your firm, your store, and they say, well, I have I have a page, I have a website. It's like, really? That's not, it's an immediate translation. It's very, I mean, for me, it's kind of funny and kind of sad at the same time. And let me use a very clear example. You will understand it. Maybe some of our friends in the US won't, but I'll try to make it as adaptable for the US as possible. In Mexico, we have a very important bookseller, a very important bookstore. It's called Gandhi. So Gandhi is all over the place. It's all over the country. When we need a book, we go to Gandhi. The website of Gandhi is awful. It has always been awful. It has, I mean, before the pandemic was awful, and it is still awful. So when people need a book, you don't look for the website of Gandhi. You go to Amazon. And it's very weird, because why am I going to Amazon if I have a Gandhi store 3 blocks from my house? And it would be really easy for me and for them to bring me the book that I am ordering. Well, I use this example. I mean, in real life, I tried to order books via Gandhi, and the time it took for them to send the book, it was almost seven business days. So I finally went to Amazon for a book that I could have, you know, it's like, it's just amazing. And what's the takeaway from this? Gandhi hasn't been ready to adapt, not only to the pandemic. It's like, it hasn't been ready to adapt years before the pandemic. I hoped maybe that the pandemic would put pressure on these firms. Like, it's not only that you have a website, you have to be efficient, and you have to use technology behind the website to adapt all your processes and to be much more efficient. And Gandhi just didn't do it. If you go to the website at this point in time, it's the exact same website that was before the pandemic. So there's an issue, and that's the readiness to adapt. If you are not able to adapt, I mean, as big as an important technology is, you won't be able to survive in this world, because technology is here. I mean, we can't deny it. So the readiness to adapt from SMEs in Mexico has to be, I mean, we have to like take the veil out of their face, because sometimes they think that, well, maybe the government or maybe public policy or maybe just the name that the bookseller or the firm itself has will protect them. And it won't. And we all know that it won't. And there's another thing that you were mentioning, Jake, and for me has been like real eye-opener. Women were the most affected by the pandemic economically. They left their jobs, they had to stay at home taking care of the kids, and making sure they try to connect or whatever they would try to with our daughters, sons and daughters here at home. What happened with women? Women started to use social media and social networks to start selling, to start producing things or services and sell them. It has been like a discovery. We even have a name for them in Mexico. We call them nennies. It's a horrible name. I won't even translate it, but it's a horrible name. But we have a name for them. And the phenomenon is great. I mean, there are at least 5 million women employed this way, self-employed. And of course, they don't pay taxes. They are under the radar. They move in social media. But the force that the economic force that these women have in the current trade of goods and services in Mexico, it's amazing. And nobody's talking about them. And it's a very important, I mean, they are using technology, which is not technology, because I mean, social media, how can we talk about technology if it's just social media? But they are using the very little knowledge that they have, because it's, I mean, don't imagine sophisticated producer. The very little knowledge that they have, they are using them, and they are using it for allowing them to produce and to generate more income for their family and for the economy as a whole. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that we're seeing currently in Mexico.
I'm not going to jump to policy yet, Jake, but because I want to double down on this comment that Valeria is making. And I think it's technology and digital environments for running the business, for maintaining your information. I know for Mexico and for the US has to be the same, but I would like to have your take on it. For reporting to the government, for making this, for decision making. I think this is one of the issues that we see with micro and small businesses, is because they don't have control of their information and control of how the business is actually doing, that they are improvising. And I think this is something key that they have to understand. Hopefully either do it themselves, or this notion of creating the ecosystem and the environment so they have access to this type of technologies. But I think this is one of the areas where we see a lot of failure in Mexico, is because you did not have control of your business, because you don't have that behind the scenes of the web page, as Valeria was saying. So you end up being out of business because you don't have cash flow, because you're not taking right decisions, or because you're not paying your taxes and you get in trouble with the authorities.
Yeah, no, so I mean, first of all, Valeria, everything that you said was really inspiring. And I think what I heard was that there's just a lot of people hustling and making it work. And Amelia, what you said, sort of improvising. As you were talking, there was one example running through my mind. It's a woman that we've gotten to know, the CEO of Cielo Hammocks, Josefina Vidal, she runs the social impact business. And, she works with 900 Mayan artists to weave hammocks from their homes. And if you look at her experience during COVID, production was almost completely halted because of travel restrictions. They shifted almost completely from wholesale to direct to consumer and in retail. And so when you hear her talk through, how she hustled and that kind of ecosystem that she relied on, it was social media, it was Instagram, it was, Valeria, to your point, WhatsApp, in order to, text and complete transactions on the fly. It was using platforms like Wayfair and Amazon to shift to retail sales globally, shipping and logistics services in order to ship those products and get them out in a way that they're tracked. And so, she has so many challenges, but to hear her talk about that opportunity to be digital and global was really inspiring. I think, Amelia, to your point, we ought to be thinking about the ways that governments can make it easier. And even, I know in Mexico and Brazil and other countries, the time it takes to comply with taxes is extraordinary, right? And so, are there ways that policy or government programs can make it easier for small businesses to comply with the regulations that they need to comply with, but then also to look at how governments can help with their digital transformations and with their global journeys?
Absolutely. And I think this takes me to the next point that I want to talk about, which is the policy side. Facilitation. I know, Jake, you are big on the trade side, but I think also on making business easier from from the point of view, nothing against accountants, but I always say, if we can do something to reduce one accountant and to change that accountant for an engineer or for a data scientist, I think we are going to be facing a better future. So what's your take, Jake, on this, on policy? And I think especially if we can look at it from the binational perspective too. I think the high-level economic dialogue that was installed again by the US and Mexico, I think it's a fantastic news. Hopefully try to bring back a little bit of the binational architecture to manage the relationship, which at least in the US-Mexico Foundation is something that we really fight for. We believe that the relationship between Mexico and the US, 450 million people or so that do a lot of business together, require institutions and an architecture to manage the relationship beyond Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. So I'm glad to hear that the high-level economic dialogue is established again, and that SMEs is one of the lines that they want to talk about. I think this is probably the most talked about topic in governments and policy, but maybe where less things are actually done, because implementation, I think, is different and complex, and I think there's lack of understanding of actually what the SME requires to thrive. So, Jake, again, on policy, what do you think are the priorities? What would you recommend? How we go about doing this? And maybe you can hear a little bit on binational policy under the high-level economic dialogue. That would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think broadly, we would encourage a whole of government focus on reducing burdens and increasing the use of, digital solutions for small businesses. And that's something that we've talked with, the Treasury Department and USTR and others about. But let me just highlight a couple of aspects. First of all, on the binational and North American fronts, I think, really excited like you are, Emilio, that the high-level dialogue has been sort of restarted. I would look back to USMCA as well. And so if you look at, I think USMCA really took a huge step in kind of solidifying that North American e-commerce ecosystem. So, we have now in place kind of a gold standard chapter on digital trade. Emilio, we have important commitments to kind of streamline and digitize customs and trade facilitation practices.
Correct.
And there's an entire chapter on small businesses that sets up this ongoing kind of working group to exchange best practices and connect networks of US and Mexican and Canadian small businesses. I will note, and Emilio, you alluded to this, that these agreements only succeed when they're sort of properly implemented and enforced. And so, we want to make sure that all three governments are implementing the provisions that enable that e-commerce ecosystem. But so I guess the other thing that I would point to is that I think there's a real opportunity to kind of improve sort of small business promotion and trade promotion programs and see if there are best practices that the United States and Mexico can share. If you look at the US Small Business Administration, they've got this STEP program that it gives funding to small businesses to help them to globalize their digital presence. Are there best practices? Are there networks? Are there initiatives that the United States and Mexico, or that the three USMCA countries can consider and put in place that would kind of enable small businesses' digital transformations and their global journeys?
Thank you so much, Jake. Valeria, same topic.
I think that we have to address both all parts of the spectrum. So I was mentioning at the beginning that we have different SMEs in Mexico. Most of the SMEs in Mexico are informal. What do I mean by informal? They are not registered. They don't pay taxes. We don't know, if they even exist. It's like we suppose, and they are mapped by the National Accounts Institute, but we don't have many information of that. That's basically what we have. They exist. That's basically the whole of the information that we do have. And then we have the other part. We have the sophisticated SMEs. Of course, the sophisticated, quote unquote, SMEs are formal, and they are, of course, kept in check by the authorities. And this difference makes a very huge divide between these two groups of SMEs. The first one, the informal ones, can't grow, because if they grow, they will be target of the IRS, of the Mexican IRS, which I completely understand. So they want to be under the radar. So they won't grow because they don't want to grow in a weird way, because they know that
Correct.
if they grow, they will be, starting to be extortioned by many different agencies. So they rather keep small. And then we have the firms that we want them to grow, that we want them to, to thrive. And these firms are, in a way, extorted by very different agencies. It's not only the Mexican IRS, because of course they should pay taxes and they will pay taxes. It's not only that. So we should, I think it's a must, reduce the administrative burden, because it's basically hell for these small firms. It's very complicated for them to grow. And they, as we found out with a study that we made for Intuit, with Intuit, is that they are subject to many different stages of extortion, because they are not extorted by one agency, which might sound weird, but they are extorted by many different agencies. So these firms that we want them to grow, and they are formal, we are continuously imposing them more burden than the initial one of becoming formal. So we have to release these firms of this huge burden and let them grow. So we have to have that talk with the government organizations, because it's not possible for these SMEs to grow if they are going to be continuously extorted by different governmental agencies.
I agree 100%, Valeria. I think we need to make sure that we have different sets of rules, everybody complying, but we cannot have the same global operations having to do the same type of bookkeeping, accounting, taxes than the company that have 2-3 people self-employed.
It's just not realistic. It won't happen.
Yeah, we had during this report that you made with Intuit, I had the opportunity to look at it, and had people that run the business, that are the owners of the business, that have to spend 5-6 days of the month just managing the compliance piece of it. That's 25% of the month on just preparing information. And I think that's where technology plays a huge role on it. And so we are almost closing down. A few comments, Jake, on any ideas on how we bring this cooperation together binational. And I think that you mentioned the role of civil society, but any quick thoughts on this from your side?
Yeah, I think that's the question that I ask, and then we ask over here is, how can we build out that network of small businesses and civil society and government so that small businesses have the tools that they need? I think it would be really interesting to build on some of the existing mechanisms, through the high-level dialogue, through the USMCA small business dialogue, and some of the other check-ins. There's a trade facilitation working group as well under USMCA that could involve small businesses. Could you use those existing forums without reinventing the wheel to try to make sure that we are building networks and the resources that enable small businesses to thrive across our borders?
Thank you, Jake. Valeria?
We have to talk, Abilio. We have to talk a lot, and we have to not only talk, but we have to realize which are the specific points that make this growth or this thriving or this trade complicated in real life. And when we pinpoint the different areas that we need to work on, we have to start working on them. We just not have to make many papers. We always say that Mexico is overdiagnosed, that we always have a new diagnosis for the same illness, but we basically don't resolve. We don't cure the illness. We have many diagnoses, but we don't address the illness itself. So we have to start working, and we have to talk. We have to pinpoint very specific problems, not only, the high level economic problems. We have to start talking about the very small details that make this trade or this relationship more complicated and start solving them little by little. I think that we are not going to solve, the whole enigma. We just have to start solving small pieces, and in that way, we will be able to move forward much faster.
Excellent. Last comment is there's another QuickBooks, Intuit QuickBooks study that says that optimism among small businesses is growing, especially in the United States. So you guys agree with this? You are optimistic about the growth of SMEs? Valeria, then Jake to close.
I am. I'm bullish on this. I think that SMEs will keep on growing. I mean, that's just life. They will keep on growing. But of course, they will have to stay updated. Because if they just sit and relax, another SMEs will come and will eat them away. I mean, that's the way ecosystems work.
Thank you, Valeria. Jake?
Yeah, you know, my colleague Jamaica has had a chance to interview a number of small businesses from North America and around the world. And, you know, the conversations have been so inspiring and uplifting that despite all the challenges that they face, they're hustling, they're making it work, back to the earlier conversation we had. And they're looking forward to the future. And so, you know, I'm bullish about that, but I'm also bullish that we can do more to encourage governments and the private sector to work together to enable their global journeys. And so looking forward to working with you all on that.
Thank you so much, Jake. I'm also bullish. Let me tell you why, because by listening to you and the things that we know is that there is a path for successful SMEs. We have the pieces of the puzzle together. We have, as you said, Jake, best practices. If we can talk more, as you're saying, Valeria, on these best practices, if we can share the best practices, I think we have the technology that enables them to do it. I think if we work a little bit on policy, and certainly if the group invites us to talk about financing, I think we can really have a better regional ecosystem for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to thrive. And I do take that, you know, concern of inequality. When we were negotiating NAFTA to now USMCA, I think one of the lessons learned was we forgot about the people that were left behind with this transition that I think was overwhelmingly positive for the region. But some people were left behind. I think we have to make sure that we don't make the same mistake again and make sure that we don't leave our micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises behind. And again, you guys are sharing with us a path forward to make sure that that doesn't happen. So again, thank you very much. I'm sure we've all learned a lot, and it's a pleasure meeting you, Jake, and Valeria. It's always a pleasure to share the virtual space with you for the last 18 months, hopefully now more face-to-face. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Emilio. Thank you, Jake.
Thanks, Valeria.
Hello, I am Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Chairwoman of the House Small Business Committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. It is an honor to join the Small Business Roundtable and global leaders in entrepreneurship for this exchange. Today, small businesses are at an inflection point. 2020 was a brutal year for entrepreneurs around the globe. In the United States, we experienced our highest annual number of small business closures. Businesses fortunate enough to stay open have to shift operations or open their entire business model to keep customers and employees safe. But despite all these challenges, which would have been unimaginable a short time ago, small businesses have done what it takes to survive and serve their communities through this crisis. COVID delivered a substantial blow to entrepreneurs, but with conditions improving, many business owners are dusting themselves off and looking towards the future. But these businesses cannot do it alone. It will take support from their communities and governments for them to build back better. That is why events like this are so critical. COVID was a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. As we work toward recovery, we must explore all the tools at our disposal for helping entrepreneurs. An unprecedented crisis requires an exceptional response. So we must think outside the box and consider innovative solutions to the problems facing businesses today. Throughout the COVID crisis, the Small Business Committee has worked to create relief measures that meet the moment. Programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program were first-of-their-kind initiatives that helped save millions of small businesses from permanent closure. The success of these efforts shows that we cannot shy away from bold action. In fact, we must embrace it. That is why my committee did last month when we passed an unprecedented investment in American small businesses. The bill, which is part of the larger Build Back Better Act, will invest $25 billion in American entrepreneurs. For small firms, particularly the smallest small businesses, accessing capital is their biggest problem. Unfortunately, funding is drying up for the firms that need it most. Lending reports have shown that loans under $150,000 have decreased by more than 40% over the past decade. This bill will invest tens of billions of dollars in direct and indirect lending to help deliver funds to the smallest of small businesses to combat this trend. We can empower entrepreneurs to create more good-paying jobs and drive our recovery by filling gaps in the small business lending market. Small businesses also frequently have less access to critical resources compared to their corporate counterparts. That is why the Build Back Better Act will invest millions in improving the Small Business Administration entrepreneurial development programs that provide free or low-cost training to small firms. America's tax code also hampers small businesses by allowing large corporations to avoid paying their fair share. A Main Street business shouldn't pay more in taxes than a Fortune 500 company. The Build Back Better Act will close tax loopholes and level the playing field for small businesses. The revenue raised from these reforms will help fund transformational programs like National Paid Leave, which will allow small businesses to better compete with big companies when it comes to offering benefits and attracting workers. We can transform our economy into something more equitable, inclusive, and fair by enacting these measures into law. Small businesses deserve the same opportunities to compete as large corporations. We cannot afford to return to a pre-pandemic status quo that consistently put them at a disadvantage. Small firms are the foundation of our economy and the glue that holds our communities together. They are far too important to neglect. That is why I am doing all I can to advance their interests and advocate for policies that support job creators. Because for our nation to recover, we need these small businesses operating at full strength. Thank you again for allowing me to speak with you today. It's been a pleasure to hear and learn from the small business leaders here today. I hope the rest of this exchange is productive, and I wish you all the best going forward.
Good morning, and thank you again for joining us for EX21. I'm Karen Ng of CSMI. There's no denying the passion and enthusiasm across public and private sectors to support small businesses. And considering the increased democratization of digital tools, launching a small business seems like to be an increasingly viable path for the world's entrepreneurs. While the pandemic increased economic pressures in many communities, industries, and value chains, it has also put a spotlight on entrepreneurship as a powerful economic driver. Massive job loss has been paired with record rates of entrepreneurship as innovators adapted or pivoted their business to address challenges and capitalize on quickly emerging opportunities. Looking forward, leaders are drawing on such lessons to rethink traditional approaches to economic growth in favor of more innovative, inclusive systems. They are studying the support systems that help entrepreneurs, particularly those from underrepresented groups, start and scale new companies. Some are doubling down on policies and programs to encourage the growth of resilient, inclusive economies in which founders are key players. In this panel, we'll unpack the challenges that accompany starting and running a business and how governments and technology can lower the barrier to entry. There are thousands of companies and organizations that are deeply embedded in the operations of small businesses, but perhaps none more than the organizations we have joining us today for our panel. Welcome to Alexi Boyd, CEO of the Council of Small Business Organizations Australia, the leading small business advocacy organization exclusively representing the interests of small businesses in Australia. Laura Jones, Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which supports more than 95,000 small businesses and advocates for small business with politicians and decision makers. And Candace Waterman, President and CEO of Women Impacting Public Policy, a nonpartisan organization that educates and advocates on behalf of women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. Welcome. So let's get started. Let's start off. In some ways, COVID-19 has been devastating for small businesses. On the other hand, it has produced a record-breaking number of new business formations around the world. So let's dig into this data. Who are starting businesses? Why? And how are they faring? I'm going to ask Alexi to start us off.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. We've seen a real spike in the number of businesses starting up in the last few months, right in the middle of what is the longest lockdown in the world, apparently. It's being experienced in Melbourne at the moment. And we're just coming to the end of I think we're up to 13 weeks of lockdown here in Sydney, which is really fun. So, but what we're finding is the statistics show that there's an increased number of businesses being set up. Now, on the one hand, you could say that's an economic indicator of growth and people have got, real stability and a surety that it's a good time to start a business. But on the other hand, when you dive down into the diagnostics, we can see that quite a number of those are in sectors of the community, of the small business community, where people have been losing jobs and there's been a pivot towards starting up their own business. Places like the IT sector, where businesses, where people can actually earn a lot more money as contractors than they can as employees. So it really depends on the data and drilling down into that as to seeing where those businesses, which small business sector those businesses are being set up into. I think it's important to look at the granular level. It is an opportunity for entrepreneurship in some sectors, definitely, where there is growth, but the number of sectors where we're experiencing growth at the moment here in Australia during lockdown are really minimal with compared to the overall devastation that's happening for the rest of small business. So I think it's important to look at the timing of when those businesses come out of the woodwork, and it is an opportunity for entrepreneurship, but the chances and the sectors which can really experience growth are so narrow and so small compared to the broader community that the focus is still very much on those small businesses as a whole who are experiencing such loss.
Laura, can you give us your insight?
Sure. I think Alexi did a good job of putting this in perspective. I think we have to balance. Yes, there are new businesses starting, and that's an amazing it's amazing to see entrepreneurship even under the most difficult conditions, and small business owners are often, they have that resilient, positive, can-do attitude that you absolutely need at any time. The best of times to start a business, and now is not, as we know, the best of times. But I think Alexi's also right. We have to look at the overall, what's going on overall, and on net, obviously, what's going on for small businesses is very worrying. We're estimating that we're going to lose 1 in 5, and we are going to be a smaller economy coming out of this than going into that. I think that's true for most countries in the world right now. And so it becomes really important to think about how to encourage entrepreneurship and support those that are still hanging on and trying to bridge over to back to recovery, and for those new businesses that have started. But it's not unusual in an economic downturn that people, for various reasons, would be more entrepreneurial. Sometimes because you lose your job, other times, and I think this is particularly true in COVID, people are thinking about, what do I really want to do? And there's a whole rethinking of life going on right now. And maybe if you always wanted to do this, you're saying, well, maybe now's the time.
Thank you. I know that you have the data, but then there's also an emotional or psychological component to that. And let's close this off with Candace. What are your thoughts?
Well, I thank you for asking the question. I agree both with Alexi and Laura and what was stated. And really for US-based women-owned businesses, I think it's also imperative to look at, again, the drivers, right, of the new business boom during COVID. We know here in the US that COVID affected women more than men. And therefore, women started to open businesses out of necessity in a large capacity, right? Many of them lost their jobs due to lack of childcare, which is really a big driver from a COVID perspective. They needed flexibility with their schedules to manage the household. That means being a caregiver for those children, or in many cases, being a caregiver to the husband or partner who may have contracted COVID, right? That's another reason. And the other is truly for some financial stability. And so I think women, of course, are natural problem solvers. They saw this as an opportunity to open these new companies. And we're looking at everything from COVID protective equipment to HR functions like team building, managing a decentralized workforce, training on how to show up in a virtual environment, which all of us has had to do. And also some of them even expanded their current business. So I really strongly believe those who started their business during COVID will be very successful because of their resiliency, and they had to start during a difficult time. And, I think that they just are going to think differently. They're going to look at their online presence. They're going to look at e-commerce. They function in a virtual world to start with. And many of them are agile from a business model perspective. And at the end of the day, again, I think resiliency with all of them, new or existing, is the key.
I like how you started this whole thing about women are solution providers, right?
We are.
In addition to having an all-female panel today, right now. So, hey, and I think we can all agree that supporting entrepreneurs is the key to getting our economies back on track. Let's talk about barriers for entry for entrepreneurs in your country. I'm going to start with Laura, please.
Yeah, well, I think Candace just touched on some of them, some of the barriers. Certainly, there's a lot going on for people emotionally, and that is difficult. We're in tough times, but aside from that, we also have labor shortages are really biting hard in Canada, and so finding staff, finding people to help you start is a big barrier. Financing is always typically a barrier, and that's we're hearing a lot about how tough that is. And then being aware of all the various obligations that you have to do when you're running business, that tends to bite you a little bit more actually as you're up and running. Starting a business isn't the regulatory and red tape hassles of starting tend to not be as bad, but that is yet another thing you have to worry about. There's just an awful lot you have to think about when you're first starting.
Agreed. Candace, let me know what you think on top of the barriers you already mentioned.
Absolutely. For women, it's access to capital and access to markets, right? And that means access to capital is starting, access to market is sustainability. And so when you think about that, you also have to think that oftentimes it's access to a supportive resource of folks around you, right? Meaning helping to juggle at home and juggle children, right? The fear of losing health insurance during this time of starting a business can be a barrier, right? They perhaps are working somewhere, to Laura's, position earlier, stating that people are really looking at what they want to do. You're working at a position and now you're still, starting your job. So that could be a barrier. And then the ramp up time, right? And I think last is overthinking things, right? Lack of confidence, meaning suffering from, analysis paralysis. Should I start now? How should I start? What should I start? Do I need to bootstrap? What does all of that mean? And these are all, I think, probably just the tip of the iceberg of barriers that we've stated so far.
So a little self-sabotaging in a way, right? As you're trying to make sure that you're doing everything properly. I love the points that you brought up. And let's close it off. Alexi, why don't you give us your thoughts?
Yeah, look, 100% agree with the issue around venture capitalism, particularly for small businesses who are run by women. Some latest statistics here in Australia said only 8% of venture capital investment funding has gone to businesses owned by women in the startup space, which is really disappointing. And obviously some work needs to be done there. But if we look at where we are currently, again, similar to what Laura said, we're experiencing real issues with labour shortages, both in skilled and unskilled, because of all the borders being shut. And of course, now we turn our mind to maybe some issues around supply chain. So as well as the normal, hurdles you have and barriers to entry for small businesses, to be starting one right now is quite difficult because there's a lot of issues in the marketplace that wouldn't normally have been there because of COVID. And I also wanted to raise the importance here where governments should be turning their minds to advocacy while the economies of small businesses grow around the world. What is it that you can do to support small businesses in this growth phase as they rebuild and re-engage with their workforce and get back up on their feet? And that doesn't necessarily have to come in the form of handouts or funding or money to deal with the huge debt problem that small businesses have, but more around the programs. What is it that governments can do at this point to help small businesses get to that growth phase faster than they normally would as we rebuild the economy?
And that leads us to the next question for sure. I know CFIB is focused on working with the government to reduce some of these barriers for entrepreneurs and SMEs in Canada. You talk a lot about lack of access to capital and access to the markets. So Laura, can you tell us what you've learned from some of this work?
Well, we're constantly monitoring the top priorities of small businesses through our regular interactions with them in our surveys and also on our helpline. We take about 40,000 calls in a normal year. COVID, we had last year about 80,000. So we're in touch with businesses every single day. And the list of worries in the COVID era is very long. So, everything from financing that we've already touched on, supply chain, labor shortages we've touched on. Debt is a big deal for a lot of businesses right now. 3/4 of businesses took on COVID-related debt to manage through the pandemic in Canada, and the average of that debt is $170,000. So, of course, we're working with governments to deal with that. But two that I'll just touch on briefly: keeping costs manageable. Our big message to governments right now is do not do anything to increase the costs of small, they just don't have the same financial cushion that they had. They're in debt. They can't afford additional, they're struggling to find labor. They're increasing their wages sometimes to attract labor. So that's one big piece of it. And the second big piece is keeping regulations manageable. And I think this is where there's a huge opportunity for governments. It doesn't cost as much as reducing taxes, and you can give people back money and time by just simplifying the regulatory burden. And through the COVID era, what we've seen is governments can be more nimble. They can get vaccines approved in a year instead of a decade. Municipalities can approve patios in 24 to 48 hours. Provincial or state governments can allow you to see your doctor online and accept electronic signatures. So how do we do more of that? And how do we put the user experience in the front of that? So that's a benefit to all citizens, making it easier to interact with and deal with government and your compliance obligations. That's something that benefits all of us and something we're very focused on.
Wonderful. So I'm going to direct the same question to our other panelists. So Alexi, tell me, what are you hearing from the SMEs in your country that are the biggest pain points when running their firms?
But look, isn't it interesting what Laura was saying about how fast governments can move when necessity provides a cause? We're finding exactly the same thing, that, oh, look at that, you can do things faster than you normally would if given a little bit of a push or a nudge, or it's going to be economically beneficial to everybody out there. And I think governments, maybe advocacy groups, can learn from this experience that governments can move faster, and then they could be nudged in a certain direction if the benefits are there. So I think it's important to note that that's part of the puzzle, is that the hard work that advocacy groups do at the federal level in a lot of cases really helps to manipulate small businesses' experience on the ground level. And I think that we've found that the ability for governments to change direction, to move legislation in the right way, has been really helpful. And never before has small business had such a voice, because it's recognised as such an important part of the economy, the biggest employer. It'll be the biggest driver once we're up and running again. So I think it's a great opportunity right now to say, hey guys, you managed to do this, this, and this during COVID. How about we keep going in that direction? We keep reducing red tape. Because I think that's one of the biggest barriers, obviously, is finding yourself starting up a business and then hitting a brick wall because you've got to fill out another form, or you've got to deal with a different government department, or you have to, make sure that you're compliant in a way that you hadn't really thought of before. And in one way, COVID's shown that to us as small businesses. We used to think that we only had to deal with fair work, which is our industrial relations, or safe work, which is all about our safety in the workplace. But now there's about 15 other departments that small businesses have had to deal with, and we can't have that happen during a crisis. And there are more crises to come. We need to make sure that you simplify and make it easier for small businesses to deal with government so they can get on with running their businesses.
So we don't want them to go backwards at all.
There's a lot of lessons.
Now we know you're capable, right? Yes. We know you're capable of going quicker. So, Candace, tell me what your insight is on this.
Well, I could not agree more with my two colleagues here, and with Alexi and Laura. I mean, when you talk about the opportunity to really have policy transform, right? What's going on in the business environment, this is absolutely the time. We're an organization that represents the 12.9 million women-owned businesses in the country. And right now, as a result of the feedback and conversations that we've had with our women business owners, workforce is top of mind for, what is the biggest pain point? And we have an opportunity, to talk through, what are some of the policies that we can put in place from a workforce perspective. I mean, we have, labor costs and such, but, how are we implementing those costs? How is it going to impact the small business? And then to Lexi's point, the regulations, there's, I think, a delicate dance between having the regulations that we need to mitigate waste, fraud, and abuse, but still provide a pathway for our businesses to enter into the supply chains in the world. And speaking of that, we know our entire supply chain right now is at risk, right? Because of the workforce. I mean, economists say that every day. So, I had one person that told me she couldn't even grow her business right now because of lack of workforce, right? And I think that's a big opportunity for us to step back from a policy perspective and say, okay, what are the biggest pain points? How can we fix it, manage it, provide support? But then the other key is, how can we do that and reduce the unintended impacts, right? So having programs for entrepreneurs, but perhaps decreasing the amount of paperwork, right, that's needed, or decreasing the amount of, agencies they have to deal with, as Alexi said. I think this environment has provided us lots of room for change, right? And it's made us, whether we want to admit it or not, comfortable with disruption.
Well, that is a great way to end that question right there. So one of the biggest challenges, we're going to circle back to finance. One of the biggest challenges before the pandemic, and especially during it, has been that unequal access to finance. I want to go through what you're seeing when it comes to persistent disparities in financial inclusion. Candace, why don't you lead us off with that?
Oh, absolutely. I really appreciate that candid question, right? In this candid conversation, because I think in order to find a solution, we have to acknowledge that systematic racism occurs in many industries, and especially from a financial perspective, right? People of color, women have been affected at disproportionate rates. I mean, it's only been 2 decades since a woman could actually obtain a loan without a male cosigner, right? And if you're a person of color, you just don't have the same access to financing, right? And in many cases, you don't even have the same terms and conditions on a loan. So we've got to acknowledge that that has occurred and then step back and say, how do we fix that, right? And so we know these kinds of injustices have affected both men and women. They've had to bootstrap their businesses. They look at non-traditional ways of financing. And I see many of them suffer from what I call application anxiety, where they're even afraid to apply for the funds that are available because of fear of rejection, or they've counted themselves out.
So that's here in the US. Let's talk about in Australia. Same stuff, just farther away?
Just about. We have one of the most heavily regulated financial systems in the world. And in one way, we've been benefactors of that during the GFC. We didn't feel it as heavily because we were so heavily regulated in that sector. But we've just been through a royal commission for financial services, and the banking sector's really been hauled over the coals as to how they lend money, and they had everything investigated right down to the nitty-gritty detail. So they've been forced to really examine the way that they borrow money and have a think about their code of conduct and the way that they implement that in their products and their interfacing with customers. The problem is it's in some ways had a bit of the opposite effect, where banks, despite very low interest rates, have actually tightened the way that their lending criteria and have become more concerned about the way that they lend money. So we've got this sort of double-edged sword. On the one hand, we've had the entire sector investigated, but it hasn't had the effect that we desire. And it absolutely is something that we need to examine. We here in Australia have a banking code of conduct that's currently up for review, and pleased to say that the small business groups are being consulted in that process. And what we're asking for is basically, rather than looking at the end customer who's taking that banking product or that loan, actually look at the loan itself and make that the product, and put all of your emphasis into the product rather than who you're lending it to. That's completely irrelevant. And so it's about that practical nature of lending. How is the code of conduct being implemented? How can we improve the amount of investment going into small businesses, and particularly those who are negatively affected by different backgrounds and such? So it's quite complex. Finance is not my forte, but it's definitely something that's continually being discussed in Australia, which is good, but it doesn't always end up. The realities of what's discussed doesn't always trickle down to have a beneficial effect for small business.
But I think it's great that they are asking small businesses their thoughts on the process or any kind of revision or improvements, perhaps?
Yeah, that's after many years of muscling into that territory to make sure that we were heard. Absolutely. That's the role of advocates, is to sort of get in there and make sure that the voice that you represent, which is literally millions, is part of the conversation. And I think that that's the hard work that advocates like the fabulous women we have on the panel today are doing constantly, is make sure that voice is heard, make sure it's clear, it's backed up with data, it's the reality on the ground of what's happening, and that regulators and legislators need to be aware of that constantly.
Understood. Yeah. So Laura, up in Canada, probably similar issues as well, or similar struggles.
Sure, we have many of the same challenges, of course, and financing is always a concern for small businesses. And I just want to pick up on what you were saying a minute ago, Karen, and what Alexa was talking about with making sure your voice is heard. And because I think there's an interesting thing happening in the pandemic. We talked about this with respect to regulation a minute ago, but I think that governments have done a better job, actually, at least in Canada, of listening to those voices, partly because they've had to be more nimble. They're not doing these long, protracted consultations. They actually are picking up the phone or having Zoom calls and saying, well, how is this affecting you? Will this design of this program work? And I've heard from many in government that they see that as something that has improved during that connection and that voice and that being heard. The second point I want to make, a different point, is just, where does this money come from if you can't get it from the bank, right? And so one option is you don't start at all, which obviously isn't a great option for the individual or for society. But the other option is, it's more challenging because you look at credit cards, and our data shows credit cards are a huge source of financing for business. And, that's less than ideal. I think we all know why that's expensive. Friends and family dipping into your retirement savings, mortgaging, through the pandemic. I know I talked to a lot of business owners who had to sell personal assets. My hairdresser sold his car to get through. And so this is what happens when the banks aren't looking at your application. That's what it starts to look like for people.
So do you think it might be advantageous if the banks and the government and the small businesses kind of collaborate, because there's so many different aspects to the solution that a small business owner or an entrepreneur would need? I think there's a little crossover between government and the banks, right? Or the credit card companies or things like that. Do you guys have any insight on public policy and how, we talked a little bit about that, but are there any other points that you would like to talk about with how the financial institutions can broaden inclusion?
Karen, I can speak to that. I think that it's not just a very simple single touch Band-Aid approach, that there's going to be one product or one solution out there that's going to solve the problems to everyone. There's a lot of groundwork that needs to go into this, and thinking about what the solutions are for different perhaps sectors of the small business economy as they recover from COVID, for example, or long term, what does the banking sector and the financial sector need to do to make sure that they're being fair and equitable with their lending practices? And then similarly, examining what's happening in the venture capital world and making sure that there's fair practices there to make sure everybody's treated equally. It's not a sort of a simple single brush stroke. It needs to be looked at long term, and it is definitely a problem that small businesses face and lending in general. But how do you find that balance is quite tricky without tipping over the economy and having too much risk out there as well. So it's obviously a very large conversation, but it needs to be looked at in a multifaceted way through government support, as well as what the banking sector is doing, as well as what venture capitalists are doing to invest in the future, and how small businesses are managing their own funds. So as Laura said, they don't end up dipping into their savings or selling off assets in order to stay afloat.
I can totally appreciate what you're saying. Candice, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that Lexi, summed it up perfectly around the sort of multi-layered issues, right? And I would add one more area or resource there, and that is those of us who are in the advocacy space, right? That we are working to help from an education perspective, right? Around educating around the financial issues, around application completion, right? Around helping to level the playing field so it's the same rules across the board. I know here in the US, we worked really, really hard in advocating for the Women and Minority Equity Act that was introduced in 2019, and then the world fell apart. But it would provide an opportunity for both women and minority companies to obtain financing from private equity firms and venture capital funds without losing their socioeconomic status, because you have to think about that too. A lot of times when you get funds from non-traditional means, people want a portion of your company. So then are you still fitting into this socioeconomic class where it has the programs to sort of fast track you through growth, right? And really thinking about that. And certainly, you know, as I said earlier, at the end of the day, it's also access to those contracts. So get the funding that lasts so that you can do what you need to do, but now that needs to grow. And so that means the pathway, you know, to sustainable and generational financial health is from access to capital. I mean, with access to contracts.
Candice, you just raised a really good point we haven't even touched on, which is procurement, which is of course,
sure.
Yeah, and you know, what is big business doing to be more fair and give more of opportunities to small businesses, and particularly those who need more support? Where's the fairness in that? Where's the equity rather than jobs for the boys or other big businesses benefiting from big business? And similarly with government, I mean, we're having a very big conversation at the moment here in Australia about payment times and making sure that small business doesn't just become a line on the balance sheet because you're withholding funds for them for up to 2 months. So I think that procurement is part of that conversation as well, making sure that the money gets down into the small business contractors and flows through your supply chain, so you don't end up with financing needed in the middle of that supply chain to pay for invoices that should have been paid in the first place.
Absolutely, which is why we advocate for quick pay, right? So that our businesses can receive their money in a net 15 and not waiting in a net 120, right? So, I mean, that, again, the cash flow is, I'll say queen because I service women-owned businesses, right? The cash flow is queen.
Cash flow is queen.
Yeah, I know that. I couldn't agree more on that quick payment piece. That's something that it sounds like we're all advocating for, and is a really good way that whether it's governments on the procurement side with small business or big business dealing with small business, one very simple thing they can do right now without a big long discussion or conversation. That should be a relatively easy one.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So as a small business owner and a minority and a woman, I totally appreciate all your advocacy that you're all doing, because I'm taking it very personally, and I'm listening to everything you're saying. I have one final question to close out this panel, and I love that you guys are engaging with each other. So feel free to just have a dialogue, and I'll just be the fly on the wall listening to you. So, what is one thing you would ask policymakers and leaders who want to support entrepreneurship to implement?
I'm not going first.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I will.
One thing.
I will go first because this is what I literally do every day. It is access to government contracting and leveling the playing field. And also because we work on both sides of the aisle, right? No pun intended. From a political perspective and then from an industry perspective, meaning both public and private. So making certain that you have access to contracts, access to the supply chain, you have development for the women business owners or business owners so that they can expand their capacity and fulfill. One of the questions that makes me probably the maddest is if I present a woman-owned or minority-owned company and the buyer says, oh, are they qualified? Instead of the first question being, what do they do? So if I could do anything, it would be that.
That's a great point. And I'll jump in too. I'm going to try and actually sneak two in, but one is, regulatory modernization, I think it's just so important. And it sounds like this big, I don't know, boring thing. And yet it affects the quality of people's lives. I mean, when you're struggling to understand a form and you need a PhD in confusing language to get through that, and that means you're spending less time with your kids, that directly affects the quality of life. And we've got survey results now for Canada and the US. We're hoping to get Australia too, Alexi, but 80% plus of small business owners are saying that this excessive burden of regulation, we're not talking about the critical stuff to keep you health and safety. That's not what we're talking about, but the red tape piece of this, 80% plus saying this is adding significant stress to their lives. And I think there's just a huge opportunity here that's a win-win for everybody. And that stress piece of it, I mean, what I hear on our helplines and from the folks across Canada who are talking to business owners every day is the mental health impact of this on business owners themselves and on their staff. Like, that stress is difficult at the best of times. We are not in the best of times. So I think that regulatory modernization piece, so that we can reduce stress and give people back some of their time, that is, respecting people's time is underrated. And I think that would be the message I would leave. Let's get back to respecting people's time.
Hey, that was one, right? I'm trying to sneak it in. Thank you. And Alexi.
I'm going to cheat and use an overarching term, which I just thought would be just move faster. You've shown us that you can pivot like small businesses can and make quick decisions when necessary, but also move faster to continue to learn and connect with small businesses to really understand. We all know that a large proportion of politicians have had their own businesses, but a lot of them are disconnected from what it means to be a small business owner. So just continue to connect and understand and learn from your constituents about what that means and the impact that what you do has on them. Move faster to cut red tape and make it easier for small businesses to move faster themselves. And also, I guess, move faster to digitize, because that is the key to reducing that red tape and making it a simpler journey for small businesses, and having everything in one place where small businesses can go to without this need to be, running all over the place to try and find the information. So I think probably just learn from what COVID has done when it comes to small business regulation and move faster to get those things happening, so that small businesses can get on with doing what they do best, which is running their business.
Wonderful. So some of these lessons are providing the opportunities and a seat at the table, understanding the importance of the person that is the entrepreneur, and then, of course, Alexi, move faster, right? So excellent lessons, excellent one-pointers to take away that are very tactical and very doable. So I can appreciate all of that advice that you have given. So there you have it, lessons we can all draw upon to reduce barriers and support the future of small business. I want to thank each of our panelists, Alexi, Laura, and Candace, for joining us today. You guys are amazing, and I appreciate all of this advocacy you do on behalf of entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'd now like to turn it over to our final spotlight.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before the inaugural Intuit, QuickBooks, and Small Business Roundtable Entrepreneurship Exchange. The success of our entrepreneurs determines the success of our economy. Entrepreneurs are not only our nation's innovators and job creators, but they are also the key to advancing America's economic opportunities. The House Small Business Committee is tasked with protecting our nation's small businesses and entrepreneurs. As the top Republican on the committee, I understand the duty we have in fighting for deregulation, lower taxes, access to capital, and increased SBA oversight, especially in the wake of the pandemic. Additionally, I recognize the importance of enacting pro-growth, deregulatory policies that break down burdensome barriers and allow our nation's entrepreneurs to enter the small business workforce. As we all know, COVID-19 devastated small businesses with state and local shutdown measures and altered capacity restrictions. Through no fault of their own, small businesses faced extreme challenges. As a response, Congress created numerous small business relief programs to provide much-needed assistance to Main Street USA. Some of the programs, such as the PPP program or Paycheck Protection Program, successfully assisted millions of small businesses from coast to coast, providing billions of dollars in assistance through private sector lending partnerships. The private sector COVID-19 relief lending has proved to be much more efficient and reputable than direct lending from the SBA. Earlier this month, all committee Republicans and I wrote a letter to House leadership voicing significant concerns with new proposals to expand federal government direct lending capabilities. Many of these proposals would move toward a fraud-ridden, cumbersome federal direct lending model. With that in mind, other programs, such as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, or EIDL, have been riddled with fraud. What's worse is done at the expense of the American taxpayer. Over the past few months, SBA's Inspector General has released several reports of waste, fraud, and abuse within the EIDL program. In May, the SBA Inspector General found that over 846,000 EIDL applications have been flagged for identity theft. That number has now risen to 1.1 million. Totally unacceptable. Prior to the pandemic, small businesses were reporting great optimism and confidence that resulted in pro-growth policies and a smart regulatory environment. As small businesses and entrepreneurs alike continue to lead the recovery, we must ensure they are given the freedom to operate without excessive government overreach. SBA's most successful and efficient lending programs are assisted by the participation of private sector lenders. This proven public-private partnership delivers capital resources to small businesses and entrepreneurs in a timely and responsible way by harnessing the efficiencies of market competition, which cannot be equaled or achieved by the federal government. Trends toward a one-lender federal government model should not proceed. On March 31st of this year, the PPP was set to expire. As Republican leader of the Small Business Committee, I worked with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to introduce and pass the Paycheck Protection Extension Act of 2021. This bill extended the PPP deadline by 2 months and provided an additional 30 days for the SBA to process loans submitted prior to the May 31st, 2021 deadline. When entrepreneurs are allowed to operate freely, our economy thrives. I firmly believe that small businesses drive our nation forward. We must create an environment for them to do so. It remains clear that Congress has a lot of work ahead of us when it comes to small business economy. By ensuring the smallest firms can recover and grow independently, by providing necessary agency oversight, and by breaking down burdensome regulations, I know we will be busy in the months ahead. Thank you for having me today. I look forward to our continued work on all of these small business issues to ensure our entrepreneurs are given the platform to prosper. Thank you so much.
Wow, what an amazing day all around. We are so appreciative of all the participants' time today and for those of you that made this event possible. We hope today's event will facilitate further conversation on the impact of small businesses in the global economy. Small businesses are the backbone of economic success, and it remains our priority to facilitate dialogues like these that enable small business prosperity. I want to thank Intuit. We applaud and we appreciate your leadership in uplifting small businesses in the global community. And to all of our members at the Small Business Roundtable, thank you for your continued work towards improving the entrepreneurial environment. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Alex.
Thank you. We appreciate the work Small Business Roundtable does to advance policy, secure access, and promote inclusion for millions of small businesses. We're honored to work alongside you as partners to power prosperity for small businesses. We're also grateful to our industry partners, Facebook and Visa, for their support of this year's Entrepreneurship Exchange conference and their continued efforts to support the growth and innovation of small businesses around the world. To every viewer and participant today, you are all the difference makers. Together, we have an opportunity to level the playing field and make entrepreneurship an option for anyone with a great idea.
Hello to everyone joining us for today's Entrepreneurship Exchange workshop. I'm Eric Rettig, Head of Small Business Policy and Regulatory Affairs. And at Intuit, we're on a mission to help customers solve their biggest financial challenges. And to us, that means doing what we can to help reduce the policy and regulatory barriers that impact small businesses and connecting them and the self-employed with experts, advisors, and resources that can help them successfully manage and grow their businesses. That's why we are excited to offer today's curated masterclass workshop with Carl Reeder, a best-selling author, serial entrepreneur, speaker, and business commentator. Now, Carl has tailored this workshop specifically to meet the unique and practical realities of small business owners who want to develop and strengthen their e-commerce chops. During his long and varied career, he has bought and sold, founded, co-founded, and invested in, and sought investment for many businesses. He has helped countless business owners either start or grow their businesses through his columns, keynote talks, and advice. Now, recognized as one of City AM's top 100 entrepreneurs in 2016, he is the chair of the practitioners panel at ACCA, a former board director at the British Franchise Association, and an ambassador for the Association of Independent Professionals and Self-Employed. Take it away, Carl.
Hey guys, I'm Carl Reeder. I'm a small business expert, an author of the best-selling book Boss It, and I also run a few small businesses myself. Over the years, I've worked with thousands of businesses, helping them to start or grow, helping them to franchise their business, and ultimately helping the business owners achieve what it is that they wanted to achieve from their business in the first place. And it's safe to say that over the last 18 months, it's been a bumpy ride. The pandemic has caused some unimaginable disruption to the economy, particularly for small businesses who might not have been prepared for their digital journey. They might not have even had a website. So with the prospect of lockdowns and consumers not being able to go out and visit their shops or attend their classes if they're a tuition business, these business owners have had to pivot very quickly. And whilst it has been very up and down and in some cases very traumatic, it has also been exceptional to see some of the inspirational stories that have come from small businesses. So what I'd like to do is to share with you today my 10 top tips for e-commerce for small businesses. Now, these tips don't come from any genius that I might have. Instead, these 10 tips come from business owners that I know, business owners that I trust, from businesses that I've seen doing some remarkable things. And those businesses might be small, they might be big, they might be multinational corporates, they might be sole traders. We have all different types of examples here of how you very practically can implement some of these tips within your business. And tip number 1 is that we must remember that e-commerce isn't just for product businesses. Now, I guess it's going to be fairly natural that within much of the stuff that I talk about today over the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'll be sharing with you stories about product businesses, about how businesses have reached their end consumer, how they've sold more product, how they've got it out there. But the reality is that e-commerce can be embraced by any business of any shape or size. And I wanted to share with you the journey of one of my clients and friends. He's a dear friend of mine, a guy called Rob, and Rob run a sports training business. And this business was reliant on going to parks or to church halls and teaching kids how to play football or play cricket. You know, the kind of sports activities that we did pre-pandemic without a second thought. But naturally, with lockdowns and not being able to attend group events, he wasn't able to trade in the same way. So what did Rob do? Rob actually decided to start an online business during that time, but he didn't just sell products or services. He actually helped, alongside one of his friends, a gentleman called Joe Calzaghe, former super middleweight and light heavyweight boxer. Some of you might have heard of him. And they designed an online boxing curriculum. Now, boxing to me is one of those sports that I certainly wouldn't imagine being able to be taught through a Zoom class or through an online mechanism. But they actually managed to crack the essence of boxing for children and to provide this tuition successfully, and not only start a business that was completely pivoted from the original type of business that they had, but actually roll it out over the time of lockdown into its own successful business in its own right. You see, when we think of e-commerce, we often think of selling items one by one, but we always must remember that there is often a facility for our services as they stand today, our products as they stand today, to be sold online. And it might be that we're not selling widgets for £10 or $10 to the end consumer. We might be making some quite large sales to corporates. It might be that we're providing services such as consultancy and so on. We need to think about how we can adapt what we do, not dramatically, but how we can adapt it and create an online opportunity there. Number 2, bricks and clicks. Now, we've all heard of bricks and clicks, and there are some amazing brands that have really embraced the whole bricks and clicks formula. You know, we could just look at mobile phones, and we can look at Apple, we can look at Samsung. They've both dominated the bricks and clicks formula. And in fact, as did Nokia before that, Nokia had a number of flagship stores in Europe. And they understood that actually the brand building from a high street presence helped their online sales in the same way that their online presence helped boost the bricks and mortar sales. Now, I'm sure that many of you are thinking that I'm not Apple, I'm not Samsung, I don't have pots of cash to do this stuff. Well, you know what? Neither are most small businesses. 99% of small businesses don't have the ability to create these sorts of flagship stores in capital cities. However, there are ways that you can do this on a much tighter purse string, and that you can reach your end customer and help supplement your online brand through the use of a local presence. And here's where I share my second story of the guys at Where London. Now, Where London is a business that I've given some informal advice to. I count the owner of Where London as a personal friend. And Alex had a business that was decimated during COVID. So they make jackets, they make coats, they make outerwear in general. But pre-COVID, their manufacturing was all based out in Shanghai. And they had a problem because in January, the factories were closing. The pandemic was very real out in China before we realised the impact that it would have on us. So they had a problem with production. But then pretty soon after, they were supplying major corporates, some big name online retailers that you would have heard of. They were providing them with these jackets and coats and so on. And these retailers were saying, look, our forward planning tells us that we're not going to have demand in 8-9 months' time. We believe there'll be another lockdown. And this was quite challenging for the business, as you can imagine. So again, they pivoted. They looked at what they could do, and they went from being a B2B supplier of clothing to a B2C supplier of clothing. Now, we all know that the B2C world is notoriously difficult to crack, and I will share my later tips, some of the ways that we can do this. But the way that Where London did it was through the use of pop-up stores when the pandemic allowed. So they took the opportunity, they took advantage of the fact that landlords had empty buildings. Retailers were going out of business, there were doors being closed. And instead of trying to just replace the retailers that have suffered, they decided to take on pop-up locations. So they would take on the locations for, say, 2 to 3 months in relatively touristic hotspots, based in London, but not in central London. Not the London that you might imagine of Big Ben and Houses of Parliament. These were areas like Shoreditch and Broadway Market. Trendy areas, but not prime areas. They took these areas, they opened a pop-up shop, and what this allowed them to do was to showcase their product on a relatively low-risk basis, But also then they found that they were increasing their traffic to their website. They were increasing their social media following, and it gave them so much content that they could share on their social media platforms. But actually, the B2C journey wasn't anywhere near as complicated or as difficult as it could have been. And in fact, it's led them to a decision that they need to make now, which is, do they go back to B2B? Or do they carry on serving the end customer through e-commerce? Now, number 3, and we've discussed a couple of examples of this, but it really deserves calling out, is that we really do need to carefully think about whether our business would benefit from a pivot. And if so, what kind of pivot should it go through, and what potential pivot should we do? And one of the aspects that's really jumped out to me during the pandemic is that the public in general now have even more of an appetite than before to shop small. It was something that was increasing. We were seeing resistance to major corporates, to franchise brands. We were seeing resistance to anything that didn't feel relatable to the local community. But over the pandemic, I know that certainly myself and my family are thankful to the local butchers, the local bakers. We're thankful to the local farm shops. All of these people that actually kept us going without the difficulties of trying to book a delivery slot from the local supermarket, and indeed the risk that brought from meeting loads of people that were outside of our bubble. So one of my good friends, a guy called James Sinclair, actually had quite a dramatic pivot that focused firmly on this shop small community basis. So James runs a small chain of soft play businesses. So soft play, for those of you that aren't aware, those of you that don't have children that drag you to these places every weekend, soft play is basically an industrial unit where there's loads of padding and fun stuff and trampolines and slides that kids can go crazy at. Now, again, during the pandemic, James had difficulties. He had 9 of his locations, he had rent to pay, he had about 400 staff. He was in quite a dire situation had he not done anything. So what did he do? One of his locations was called Marsh Farm. Now, Marsh Farm is a historic area in Essex, and on there's a lot of land. It's a children's activity area now. But what he did was, rather than trying to virtualise his children's activities, he decided to use the space that he had. He decided to use the local area and the local community to build a farm shop. He pivoted completely. He started speaking to local producers and buying in product that wasn't sold in the major supermarkets. He was coming up with quite novel ways of customers getting these products. So not just delivery, but he was offering a drive-through service as well. He was offering click and collect, all through what I would call a minimum viable product, basic web apps to enable this to happen. But what happened through him doing this was that he built a real bond with his local community, which I'm sure will set his businesses in good stead once the doors reopen and once trade gets back to its previous levels. Tip number 4 is the power of community. Because we've touched on local communities and how important it is to bear in mind the shop small notion, I think that we also can learn a lot from social communities as well. And I think that I've not seen a better example than this than from a company who you can find on Instagram at Offspring HQ. They sell sneakers. Now, for anybody who might have come across me before, you'll know that sneakers are my passion. It's a guilty secret. Well, it's not so secret, but I'm going to share it anyway. Now, they sell sneakers, but what they did was, particularly over the pandemic, they understood that they needed to do something to maintain the bond with their customers. They're a Nike Tier 0 retailer, which means they're one of a select few who's able to access certain types of sneakers. And I've spoken many times before to Ghassan, one of the directors of the company, and his vision was always very clearly that even though they were part of a corporate, they wanted to retain the small shop feel to know their customers. And they really managed to nail this over the pandemic. They increased their social media following by about 150,000, if not 200,000 over that time. And they did that by capturing the imagination of their audience, by generating conversation and speaking to them creatively over the lockdown period. Now, their e-commerce solutions aren't the best. They certainly don't have the biggest budget or the biggest reach. But what they did that was really clever was that they managed to stay on top of the trends and the noise in the wider world. They hosted live chats where people could submit Q&As and actually get some feedback from a brand that they care quite passionately about. And all of this led to a point where that actually they became the retailer of choice for quite a substantial chunk of that community. Now, there's plenty of other online communities as well. And one of the common factors that I find here is the maintenance of a human voice rather than a corporate voice. By having a human voice and having relatable people building that community, and it does take building, it's a real effort. You can find that actually you can generate quite a buzz about what you do and get that virality that we all dream of. Now, tip number 5 is about keeping on trend, but also demonstrating social responsibility. And I've observed this at arm's length. Most recently with Valentino. So Valentino, the major Italian fashion house, has released a range of clothing that is Valentino vaccinated. But we've seen a number of initiatives from small businesses, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's around carbon neutrality. We've seen some amazing initiatives where businesses, and most importantly the business owners behind them, have taken the opportunity to share their desire for social responsibility and embrace it. And it's not something that we just need to pay lip service to. If there's a cause or a need that you feel a particular affinity to, the likelihood is that provided that cause is reasonable and it's legal, the likelihood is that your customer base will also empathise with that. So don't be afraid in today's e-commerce world to bring your personality to the table, but include some social responsibility in that as well. Make sure that your customers know what it is you're about, what your brand values are about. And whilst it might not seem very professional or very corporate, actually, it's the kind of thing that compels customers to be part of your community. Now, tip number 6. I just want to talk a little bit about the need to diversify your platforms. Because if we go on a bit further, I'm going to talk a bit more about the specific of utilising social platforms and online platforms to make the most of your digital journey. But it's absolutely vital that you spread the load across your social media platforms, that you have backups in place in terms of your web presence, and that really you have a contingency plan. You see, one of the big risks that I see for many businesses is an over-reliance just on a single platform. And that is the opposite of an omni-channel approach, and I really don't recommend it. Now, it might be that as of today, you are getting your most bang for buck in terms of ad spend versus product sales on a certain platform, and that's great. But please, please, please think about spreading that load. Think about de-risking it. Think about how you can own the relationship with your customer rather than any individual platform owning that relationship. How can you capture email addresses? How can you capture the attention yourself as well as through these platforms? Brings us on really nicely to tip number 7, which is about the customer journey. And I want to share with you something that I think has been quite phenomenal from a brand called Luxe Collective. Now, Luxe Collective sell designer wear for females. It's generally those expensive things that we know, we see, but we can't necessarily afford. The Louis Vuitton bags, the Gucci bags, the Chanel, all of that stuff that is always on Christmas lists and we panic about. Anyway, they offer an agency service effectively where they buy it and then sell it on. And they actually, inadvertently, the guy behind it, Ben, had quite an amazing customer journey mapped out without realising. You see, Ben was finding that he was making a lot of sales via Instagram, but actually his attention and the eyeballs on the brand were coming in through TikTok. So what he did, and I still don't know whether this was intentional or just sheer genius. He'll never admit either way. But what he did was that he used TikTok as a way of showcasing the life around the brand. So how they authenticate items, how they ship items. And this stuff was going quite viral. You know, people were interested in seeing it, not just to know how they can detect a fake pair of trainers or a fake bag or a fake purse, but also because it was genuinely engaging. It was giving an insight behind running a small business. But they didn't sell a single item on there. Instead, what they did was to funnel the customers through to other platforms. So they had a very clear journey of where the customer goes to ultimately make the purchase on the website. And by doing that, not only did they diversify, but also they managed to raise the attention levels of the brand in the consumer's mind, so that by the time they've stumbled across another social platform with e-commerce ability, or by the time they've stumbled across the website, what they were able to do was have the reassurance and credibility that the customer had not only heard of the brand, but actually had seen how the authenticity checks take place. They had got to know the owner through these videos. You know, they really felt quite comfortable at making what could be quite a significant purchase. Now, tip number 8 is another brand that's embraced this virality. But what I love is what they've done with this. So the brand is Delicious Body. So Delhi as in India, Delicious Body. And they create body balms and face creams and so on and so forth. It's a cosmetic business. But what's been really phenomenal to see about this business is the way that they've harnessed the power of drops. Now, I'm conscious that drops might be a new concept to you all. And it's a concept that's rooted within the streetwear communities. So some of you may have come across a skateboarding brand known as Supreme. It's a fairly big brand now. Supreme have the concept of weekly drops, where they release their product once a week in store. And for anybody who's ever been near a Supreme store on the Thursday of the drop, they will know that there are queues for miles. And the reality is that if you're not on the list, you're not getting in. They created a scarcity around their product so that week after week, month after month, they could release a drop, and there's the real fear of missing out. Now, we've seen this with the likes of PlayStations and all sorts. We see this scarcity principle really generating customer demand. But the amazing thing about Delicious Body is that they've embraced this scarcity and have put it into place from a small business to business customers at a much smaller transactional level. And do you know the crazy thing? I'm going on there every week trying to see if I can get onto the drop before it sells out. And the likelihood is that they're probably only loading up 10% less stock than they know that they will sell. But provided they get the sellout, the FOMO is still there, the customers return, and the desire to purchase increases. Because as customers, we all know that we want what we can't have. And that's the reason why we queue up to buy the PS5s or we queue up to buy the Xboxes and so on. Because we feel that there's a perceived scarcity of them. It's been done really well in, as I say, the streetwear community. It's been embraced amazingly well by Adidas with the Yeezy brand and so on. And now small businesses can do this as well. Tip number 9, collaboration is key. Whether you are a product business, a service business, whatever it is that you do, have a think about collaborations. How you can have collaborative partners that can help elevate you and them by reaching your mutual audiences. Now, there are various case studies of collaborations. We just need to look at, let's say, Virgil Abloh and Off-White. We need to look at, we could look at Kim Jones of Dior. All of these brands in the fashion space that have embraced it really well. And typically what they do is they focus on finding a larger retailer or the larger retailer finding them to bring some relevance and engagement and broaden the communities. We've seen it with brands like Stone Island collaborating with New Balance, Adidas collaborating with CP Company. But actually, the power of collaborations goes far beyond fashion. I know from a podcast episode that I recorded with the chief brand officer at Kodak, but Kodak, do you remember Kodak, the old cameras? Well, Kodak actually invented the digital camera, but they were left behind because they thought the technology wasn't relevant and nobody would use it. They'd got to the point where they realised that actually they are a powerhouse in terms of brand, in terms of technology, in terms of what they can do. But they had to gain some relevance. So Kodak had collaborations with skateboarding brands, with fashion houses and so on. They looked at creative ways that they could partner with other individuals, other influencers, other brands to elevate each other's audience. Now let's bring that down to nuts and bolts. This could be as simple as a lawyer collaborating with an accountant. This could be as simple as, let's say, a local general store that sells groceries collaborating with a local hardware store and having a little area in each store to promote and sell some products for the other store. It could be as simple as that. But fundamentally, when we're looking at it from an e-commerce perspective, we need to be looking at audiences, how we can get a crossover of audience. We need to be looking at the congruence of the crossover as well. Does it make sense to the outside world, or is it a bit crazy? You know, is it like a very dated brand collaborating with a bleeding edge, not just cutting edge, a bleeding edge brand? The brands have to be similar, they have to share the same ethos, and the collab just has to appear natural to the outside world. But whatever it is that you do, if you can collaborate with another brand online, you'll find that your audience and their audience multiply. And finally, don't reinvent the wheel. I'm very conscious that for some of you, e-commerce might be fairly new. You might have some quite archaic systems for your online presence. Hey, you might not even have an online presence. What I would say is that there is no need nowadays to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of tools out there that will allow you to get up and running relatively quickly. Make sure that you investigate those tools. If you don't know how to, find somebody who can help you. You know, one of the best phrases that I use in my day-to-day life is who, not how. Rather than trying to work out how to do it, find out who can help you do it. Make sure that you consider solutions like ShopPay, Shopify, WordPress, Wix and so on. Have a look at all of these options that are out there so that rather than trying to code your own site from the ground up, instead you can piggyback off of someone else's hard work. We're now going to move on to some of the questions that I'm commonly asked. And the first one, and possibly the question that I hear over and over again, is how do I see e-commerce trends evolving post-pandemic? And you know what, this is the million-dollar question, because if I knew the answer to this, would I be sat here today? Probably not. I would be selling that magic pill for lots of money and retiring on a beach. But what I can do is I can share my view, I can share what I believe will happen, and whether or not it happens is yet to be seen. But I think that the pandemic certainly increased the appetite for people to shop online. First of all, through necessity, but secondly, I genuinely believe that a number of consumers for the first time had experienced the benefit of fast delivery, of online grocery shopping and so on. So I think that appetite for online shopping has grown dramatically. However, do I think that necessarily correlates with the death of Main Street and people just sitting at home buying online without any recourse to physical shopping? No, I don't. What I believe will happen is that as a society we will become more comfortable with the showrooming concept. And this is something that I've talked about for a number of years, but I think has been accelerated by COVID. One of the challenges of bricks and mortar stores is that they need to hold stock, and that stock needs to be held in a fairly expensive location. It needs to be out on display, the upkeep of the shop needs to be top notch, And all of this whilst paying premium rents, wages, etc., etc. It's a bit of a nonsensical model given the infrastructure that we have now for fast deliveries and the potentials that we have going forwards, whether it's drones or same day fast turnaround services. So where do I see this going? I see that the traditional stores that we would have had, that we would have strolled into and bought a product, will actually become showcases of tangible products, which will then have some kind of facility, whether that's through a tablet, whether it's ordered in store, or whether it's a case of go away and order, for the customer to then be able to order. And I think a remarkable example of this is Apple or Tesla. Tesla, for example, they don't care where you buy your Tesla from if you go to one dealer or another, because you're buying it from them. Likewise with Apple and the Apple Store, they're not particularly fussed if you buy the product there and then. The sales rep might be, but the reality is that it's a sale for Apple as a brand, not for an individual store. So that's the showrooming concept in a nutshell. So I think for products, the showrooming concept will still be a thing. I believe that click and collect will also be a thing for more rural areas. I think that one of the challenges of click and collect historically has been that it can only be offered by bigger businesses, but there are now organisations that help facilitate click and collect for smaller businesses. So I think that will continue. Going forwards in terms of the, I guess the user experience piece of online shopping, there will always be a need to touch and feel certain tangible products, given the amount or the perceived importance of a purchase. But what I think will happen down the line is that our tolerance for purchasing online will increase over time. We've noticed a massive influx of buy now, pay later schemes. And I think that whilst there are possibly some concerns that could be had around the risks around debt and so on that can bring, actually it facilitates the purchase and returns of products in the no risk basis that customers are used to within a normal Main Street store. And I think that going forwards, we're going to see eventually a real integration between social media platforms and e-commerce. So that rather than a purchase being a click from a link onto a website, actually the transaction can take place natively where the product is seen. So cutting the steps, cutting the funnel between the customer initial attention and interest and the actual purchase. So those are the things that I see happening. From a macro perspective, so they're very tactical things that I've suggested. From a macro perspective, what do I see happening with trends? I think we're going to see a continual increase. I think it's safe to say that we're seeing a dramatic increase in economic activity. Whilst we might not yet be feeling that completely on the ground, things are a whole lot better than they were a year ago. And it looks like there is a resurgence. That resurgence will be primarily online, I believe, even though the doors are open and we can go out again in some areas of the world. So I think that will continue to grow in line with general forecasts. But in terms of general trends, I think there's going to be less resistance along the way. And I think that it's down to the platforms to help facilitate that. Now for the next question. It's all around small businesses and how they best evaluate the omni-channel presence that they believe they need to have and how they identify what the best fit is for them. And this is a common question that I have because often people are asking, should I be on this social media platform or that social media platform? Where are my audience? And it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, isn't it? Because the very simple answer is be where your audience are. But the reality is that your audience are probably in more places than you think. So for me, I'm a really big believer that actually as a business owner, we need to diversify as much as possible. We need to make sure that we spread our risk, that we spread out efforts, and it can result in a bit of a dilution of our campaign if we have to learn about new platforms. But actually, if we do this intelligently and we read the room before posting, we read the room before trying to sell, if we do it intelligently, we can create a really clever customer journey, like the journey I shared earlier about Lux Collective. So what do I mean by read the room? All social media platforms, whether you use them as a consumer of social media feeds, whether you use it as a research tool, or whether you use it as an e-commerce seller, all of these platforms have a very real a culture, I guess we can say. And that culture dictates the tone of voice that we would be expected to portray on those platforms. So, for example, if you were to type in the way that you would type on Twitter, particularly in the 140 character days, and pop that onto Facebook or MySpace or Instagram, people would be confused. It would be, what's an RT? What's a hashtag? It was all quite a unique way of communicating. Now, that's a very obvious difference in culture, but there are some subtle nuances as well, because the crowd on these platforms, the community, the audience, will communicate in different ways. So responses that might seem perfectly acceptable on Facebook might actually end up triggering an audience on Reddit or on TikTok. So you need to understand the nuances of how the community communicate. You also need to understand what kind of posts and what kind of attention draws eyeballs to you. And I've got a really simple way of doing this, and I can't call myself a social media expert, but I have got 175,000 followers, so I like to think I know a little bit about this stuff. And I don't get overcomplicated about this. I look at the stuff that lands in my feed. That's it. I look at what lands in my feed, I look at what works, I look at why does that land in my feed, and then I try to replicate that best practice. So I don't focus on fads or tips or tricks or certain hashtags to use or certain noises to use on the Reels or TikToks. I don't really focus on those because I don't genuinely believe that they have any longevity. But I look at the tone of voice. I look at the type of content. I look at the type of imagery. I look at the type of videos and try to extract what works and use it in my own posts. Now, to come back to the core question about what is the best platform for you, ultimately, as a business owner, your best platform is where your customers are. I say it again, it's where your customers are, but your customers are in more places than you expect. So a question that I'm often asked from small businesses is, where do they start? If they're just looking at e-commerce tools and solutions, where do they start? And for me, I would say that by far the best place to start is at the planning stage. You see, many businesses try to dive in and do it all themselves, but actually with strong research and planning, you are more than likely to find that there's a solution out there for you already. And I covered this off earlier in tip number 10, actually, not to reinvent the wheel, but let me just go into a little bit more depth about that and a bit more depth about why you do it and the mindset that you should take. So, as I mentioned before, I try to live by the paradigm of who, not how. Who can fix this for me rather than how do I fix it myself? And I know as a small business owner, it is often so tempting to roll your sleeves up, and to try and do it yourself. The reality is that it's fairly likely you're not an e-commerce expert. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be tuning into this workshop. The reality is that there's likely to be somebody who can do this stuff better than you, and that it's fairly likely that your time is better spent elsewhere in your business. So, first things first, you should find a consultant who can help you with it. Now, it might be that your web designer can help you with it, but I would just urge you to bear in mind a note of caution, and that is that web designers typically want to build and design certain tools. There is no point reinventing this wheel. Secondly, speak to other small businesses. You will have other small businesses in your community, whether it's people that you know or people that you don't know. It might be through Facebook networking groups, it might be through LinkedIn. You might have a wide range of people that you can call on. Ask for recommendations. Also, look at other people's websites. Look at who powers their tools. It's fairly clear when certain e-commerce solutions are used to power a transaction. It's fairly clear how that's done. Have a look at the tools that seem to keep cropping up. I shared some of them earlier, the likes of ShopPay, Shopify, and so on. So have a look at all of these options. Then is the time to start doing some research. And one of the challenges of this research is that you don't necessarily know what you don't know. So I would suggest that you look for peer-to-peer reviews. You start asking your networks for feedback on these products, because the likelihood is somebody somewhere has used them. And just get really under the skin of the tools. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone to the companies and speak to their support lines, and really try to understand what would be the right solution for you. Now, what makes the right solution for a small business? First of all, it is around flexibility. Can it be adapted to meet what you've got already? Secondly, I would say it's around functionality. Does it do the stuff you need it to do? Thirdly, obviously we need to think about price. We need to be looking at transaction fees. We need to be looking at subscription fees. We need to be looking at all of that kind of stuff. But don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. It's really important. But if you've got a solution that's 90% there and does almost everything you need, provided it helps you sell to your customer, it carts it up, it tells you what you need to pack and send, and it puts the money in your bank account, that's all you need. Yes, there might be a slightly better solution out there. Yes, there might be a better iteration down the line as they upgrade it. But the reality for you as a business owner is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. But also, don't go bespoke for the sake of getting perfect. If it's perfectly good enough for you, go with it. And I know that from business owners I speak to, some of them are hesitant to use off-the-shelf platforms because of this very reason. They've been told by somebody that there's SEO challenges by using platform A or platform B, and they use that as an excuse not to take action. Again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.